Chapter 217. 10,000 gold coins. For those big forces, it was a huge fortune. Hearing that Yao Susu wanted to exchange for the Tingyu Tower's help at such a price, Lin Fei suddenly hesitated in his heart. Susu, those big forces have already taken action. Even if we don't get involved, Lin Sun will die. Why waste so much money to hire killers? Lin Fei didn't understand. Brother Fei, if we want to have a foothold in Mist City in the future, we will inevitably have to deal with other forces. The action of killing Lin Sun provides us with an opportunity to make friends with other forces. Yao Susu said quickly, as long as Lin Sun dies in our hands, we will not only avenge you, but also take this opportunity to win the favor of other forces. It's killing two birds with one stone. Lin Fei still frowned. Do we have to spend 10,000 gold coins just to make friends with other forces? Yao Susu sighed and said, Brother Fei, this is Mist City, the capital of Southwest Province. It's a rare opportunity to make friends with those forces by spending a fortune. Seeing that Lin Fei wanted to say something more, Yao Susu directly made a decision. Well, it's decided. Lin Fei was angry, but when he saw Yao Susu's indifferent and calm eyes, his heart trembled, and he dared not say anything more. Tingyu Tower. In an antique room, Tingyu, dressed in a green Confucian robe, sat cross-legged with a calm and indifferent temperament. She was playing the zither, and the sound was lonely and cold. Outside the window, the heavy rain was like a waterfall and the thunder was surging, but it couldn't suppress the lonely sound of the zither. Your Excellency, shall we take action? Outside the door, a respectful voice sounded. Clang! The sound of the zither in the room suddenly made a high-pitched syllable, and then fell into silence. The city is shrouded in murderous spirit tonight. Lin Sun is doomed, but the employer insists on doing this. I'm afraid there's a reason for it. Ting Yu's sweet and low voice came from the room. Have you found out who the employer is? It seems to have something to do with Yao Tuahai, a great practitioner. The respectful voice answered. Yao Tuahai. Ting Yu's voice became ethereal, and she said after a long time, since it's related to Yao Tuahai, let Residual Snow, Ghost Moon, and Gray Martin take action now. Yes. The respectful voice accepted the order and left. In a dark basement in Mist City, sitting cross-legged, Lin Sun swallowed a bottle of sapphire gang-refining pills and began to regulate his breath without hesitation. Fighting all the way tonight had consumed a lot of Lin's energy, especially when he killed Lu Zhong and Residual Wind. He used RFS twice in a row, which almost exhausted his physical strength. The power of RFS was extremely terrible, but it also consumed a lot of gang spirit. Lin Sun was now in the human gang realm, which was completely different from the past, but he still felt a little overwhelmed after using RFS twice in a row. Lin Sun had to seize all the time to restore his physical strength. This basement was prepared by Chu Feng for Lin Sun. There were more than a dozen hiding places like this in Mist City. These hiding places had been prepared long before tonight, all for the purpose of providing a temporary shelter for Lin Sun. While cultivating, Lin Sun sensed the condition of his body. There were several scars on his body, all of which were caused by battles. But they were not serious and had no impact on the battle. Next, it's my turn to fight back, Lin Sun murmured in his heart. After killing Lu Zhong and Residual Wind, he finally broke through the heavy encirclement. Now, he only needed to wait for his physical strength to recover, and then he could come back and kill them. In this way, his situation had changed. He was no longer a prey, but a hunter. After 30 minutes, Lin Sun's physical strength recovered, and he began to check the remaining equipment on his body. 3 burning glow crossbows, 2 black spirit sabers, more than a dozen bottles of medicine, and some miscellaneous items for fighting. According to Lin Sun's estimation, as long as he didn't meet an extremely difficult opponent, these war materials were enough to support him until dawn. What? Inadvertently, Lin Sun once again noticed the gray bead stored in his small Sumeru ring. What on earth was this thing? Lin Sun took in his hand and played with it. For a moment, he felt a familiar cold and throbbing breath in his heart, as if he was stared at by an ancient demon, which frightened his soul. Suddenly, Lin Sun ran meditating magic and visualized the image of eternal starry sky and thousands of stars competing for glory in his sea of consciousness to guard his mind. In a flash, the cold and throbbing breath suddenly collapsed and disappeared without a trace. Lin Sun's consciousness and mind also became spotless, ethereal, and clean. At this time, he suddenly noticed that the gray bead in his hand had quietly changed. The bead surged with spiritual light like the gray sea and gradually evolved into the shape of a big bow. At first glance, it seemed that there was a magic bow sealed inside the bead, which was about to break out of the shell and overturn the mountains and seas. Lin Sun thought of something and released a wisp of gang energy from his fingertips, which poured into the gray bead. Buzz! Suddenly, the gray bead changed into a bow and appeared in Lin Sun's palm. Lin Sun was shocked. This scene was too magical. It was the first time for him to see a mysterious bead that could turn into a big bow in a twinkling of an eye. What kind of treasure was this on Earth? Among all the spiritual weapons in the world, it seemed that only the armors with spiritual tattoos could be sealed in a small bead in such a magical way. But this was clearly not the armors with spiritual tattoos. It was just a bow. That was too strange. Soon, Lin Sun's eyes were attracted by it. The bow was extremely ferocious. It was composed of skulls, and it was filled with a violent and cold breath that made people's hearts palpitate. The bowstring was a bewitching blood-red color. The white hole in the body of the bow and the blood-like slender bowstring formed an extremely soul-stirring scene when they were put together. But when he held it in his hand, it was as light as a feather. Moreover, when he looked carefully at this bow, besides being ferocious and terrifying, it actually gave off a natural sense of beauty. It was as if it wasn't forged by man, but a spiritual object born from the heavens and the earth. Lin Sun tried to hold the bow and pull the bowstring. When the bowstring was fully pulled, Lin Sun felt a cold breath flowing through his body from the bow. In a trance, the world seemed to become different in front of him. He could see the extremely fine dust floating in the air, the slow flow of the air in the dark, and a mayfly larva sleeping in the corner of the wall. More than that, Lin Sun could feel that all his emotions seemed to disappear, leaving only calmness like ice and snow. In this extreme calmness, it seemed that as long as he wanted, he could kill any opponent with this bow. This feeling was so strong that Lin Sun doubted that at this moment, he seemed to be incarnated as a god with unparalleled archery skills that could overlook the world. This feeling was so wonderful that it made people want to immerse themselves in it. But in the deepest part of Lin Sun's heart, there was an uncontrollable vigilance. No, the bow seemed to be affecting him. Lin Sun gritted his teeth and recovered from the state of extreme calmness in an instant. He couldn't help but gasp for a while. Only then did he find that the back of his clothes had been soaked with cold sweat. When he looked at the weird bow in his hand again, Lin Sun's eyes had changed slightly, with a touch of deep shock and fear. It could affect the mind and occupy the will of practitioners. What kind of bow was it? Lin Sun wondered why residual wind, whose cultivation was only ordinary, was so amazing in assassination. Now, he finally understood that everything was because of this bow. In that state of extreme calmness, with the help of the mysterious power contained in the bow, ordinary practitioners could indeed exert unimaginable power. But Lin Sun was extremely afraid of it. This bow could affect the mind and even occupy the will of practitioners as if it had intelligence, which made people have to be vigilant. If it took the opportunity to occupy the body, the consequences would be unimaginable. What's more, Lin Sun found that the action of pulling the bow just now made his spiritual power show signs of weakness, as if it had been swallowed. In other words, if he used the bow carelessly, it was very likely to cause great damage to his spiritual power. Taking a deep breath, Lin Sun looked at the bow carefully again. This time, he used the power of perception. In a trance, he seemed to come to a boundless gray wasteland. A bough was suspended under the sky, releasing a cold aura that deterred all things. Suddenly, the space extremely far away in the sky exploded into pieces as an enormous ancient roaring dragon that was like a winding mountain appeared out of thin air. As soon as it appeared, it roared into the sky, and its roar was like a thunderclap that shattered numerous mountains while emanating monstrous ferocious might. But at this time, the big bough suspended under the sky suddenly glowed with a touch of gray luster. The bowstring was suddenly pulled to the full and shot out an illusory light. In an instant, the enormous body of the ancient roaring dragon beast that was like a mountain was like a piece of paper, and it silently transformed into a bloody froth that dyed the sky red. An arrow shot out soundlessly, and a ferocious hoe dragon silently fell to the ground. Its mountainous body completely turned into a bloody mist and disappeared without a sound. This was a kind of silent and shocking power. There was no earth-shattering roar, but a kind of soul-stirring shock. Lin Sun held his breath and suddenly woke up. All the illusions disappeared, leaving only the weird bough lying quietly in his palm, revealing an indescribable, mysterious color. Almost at the same time, a name that he had never heard of appeared in his mind. Woody. Woody was the name of this bough. Chapter 2:18. In the dark basement, Lin Sun held the insignificant bough in his hand and stared at it, lost in thought. After a while, he suddenly took a deep breath and ran the meditating magic. While visualizing the star circulation, he pulled the bowstring, which was as red as blood again. In an instant, a familiar cold breath spread all over his body, making Lin Sun's consciousness and emotions fall into a kind of extreme calmness. Different from the last time, this time Lin Sun developed the mystery of star circulation with his mind to guard his mind, which produced an incredible effect. He could no longer feel the feeling of being occupied in his mind and will. With the operation of star circulation, Lin Sun still maintained extreme calmness like ice and snow. The insignificant bough in his hand trembled slightly, as if it was bowing down to the bough and waking up from the silence of countless years. In a trance, Lin Sun had a feeling that he was connected with the bough by blood and could use it as freely as his own arm. Buzz! As soon as he loosened his fingertips, the fully drawn bowstring suddenly burst out an almost illusory, fuzzy gray light, tearing the void silently. At this moment, Lin Sun only felt that about 20% of his gang spirit was suddenly drawn away, and about 10% of his soul perception was also consumed due to fluctuations. With a slight sound, a bottomless hole was shot on the ground. Lin Sun narrowed his eyes and recovered from his extreme calmness. He stepped forward and looked at the hole. The edge of the hole was smooth and tidy. It was difficult for Lin Sun to find out how deep the hole was with his current perceptive power, but it was at least 3,000 meters away, because the current range of Lin Sun's soul perception was about 3,000 meters. One shot consumes 20% of my cultivation and 10% of my soul perception power. Lin Sun quickly calculated in his mind. According to his current cultivation, he could barely pull the bow about 5 times. He suddenly remembered that when he was stabbed by residual wind, this guy had shot hundreds of times with this bow at the last moment. It seems that if I want to fully control this bow, there must be a unique secret method. Otherwise, according to residual wind's cultivation of human gang realm, it is difficult to do this. Lin Sun pondered. This insignificance bow was incredibly powerful and full of mysterious colors. It could be called a rare treasure. If he was able to completely control it, then he would definitely be able to obtain unimaginable effects when assassinating or ambushing enemies. Suddenly, an extremely soft sound of footsteps rang out from the basement door. Lin Sun felt a chill in his heart. In an instant, he detected that a black shadow was approaching outside the basement door. The shadow's breath was restrained, like a ghost walking in the dark. If Lin hadn't happened to check the hole in the ground with his soul perception, he wouldn't have been able to find the shadow. An expert? Not necessarily, but at the very least, in terms of stealth, this black shadow's performance was extremely outstanding. With a faint smile on his lips, Lin Sun quietly pulled open the insignificance bow in his hand. The blood-red bowstring glowed with a strange color in the dark environment. The bow, composed of a string of white skulls, emitted obscure gray light, which shrouded Lin Sun's figure and made it distorted and blurred. Asterisk whoosh. Asterisk, the bowstring suddenly shot out, and a gray invisible spirit arrow silently streaked across the air like an illusion, piercing through the tightly shut door of the basement. Puff! There was a dull thud outside the door. Lin Sun put away the insignificance bow and rushed out in a flash. It was raining heavily outside, and there was a dead body lying in the pool of water on the ground. It was a very thin man with a bloody hole in his chest. Lin Sun squatted down and carefully looked at the man's wound. He found that the man's vitality had long been cut off, and his flesh and blood were covered with a layer of gray, like a withered tree. What a terrible power! This bow can still exert such a strong power without the help of arrows. It's really magical. At this moment, Lin Sun had a further understanding of the power of the insignificance bow. After thinking about it, Lin Sun didn't hesitate. His figure flashed and rushed into the distant rainy night. Next, it was his turn to hunt. Tonight's heavy rain was particularly persistent, accompanied by rolling thunder and lightning, which shrouded the whole mist city in a gloomy atmosphere. More than a dozen practitioners were running freely on the street. Suddenly, a blade suddenly swept out from one side of the eaves, like a galloping lightning, tearing the darkness. The battle broke out, but it came to an end in just dozens of breaths. There were corpses lying on the ground, and everyone's face was full of astonishment, panic, and confusion. Things like this continued to happen in different areas of Mist City in the following time. Bloody, cold, and chilling. An hour later, at the scene of a battle that had just ended, there were 7 or 8 dead bodies lying on the ground. Blood gathered on the ground, thick and scarlet. No matter how the heavy rain washed, it could not dissipate in a short time. Before long, several practitioners came. When they saw the bloody scene, they couldn't help but change their faces and exclaim, "Something's wrong," someone said with a dignified look. Others didn't need to be reminded. They had encountered this situation 5 or 6 times along the way. Every battle scene was bloody and cruel, and no one was left alive. From the beginning to the end, they couldn't judge the trace of the enemy at all. This was too horrible. It had been nearly 3 hours since tonight's action. Originally, they just wanted to deal with a teenager of human gang realm, and they dispatched so many people. It was reasonable to say that it didn't take such a long time at all. But now, 6 hours later, the opponent didn't die. On the contrary, people on their side were dying with hatred. This made the remaining practitioners realize the seriousness of the problem. It was very bad. The strength of the opponent was completely beyond their expectation. It was incredible. Did Lin Sun ask for help from a master? Otherwise, how could he do this with his human gang realm cultivation? Someone said in a trembling voice. Thinking of the scenes tonight, he couldn't help feeling a touch of fear. Everyone else suspected this as well. We can't go on like this. We must report this matter to Child Qi Tianxing as soon as possible. Yes, Lin Sun is too terrible. We can't fight against him at all. We must let those powerful forces send their top overmatches. These practitioners were so scared that their fighting spirit almost collapsed. They didn't dare to act rashly. They decided to retreat first and ask for support before taking action. Whoosh! But just as they were about to leave, a clear sound of saber suddenly sounded in the night not far away, like the sound of death from hell. In an instant, the faces of all practitioners suddenly changed, and they were scared out of their wits. Tide watching pavilion in the brightly lit hall, there were constant discussions. Every representative of the powerful forces was anxious at the moment, like ants on a hot pot, restless. 3 hours had passed since the beginning of the action, but there was still no good news until now. This caused a wisp of a bad premonition to surge into the hearts of many of them. Damn it, a bunch of trash. They just want to kill a teenager of human gang realm, but they haven't succeeded so far. What if not trash? Someone couldn't help cursing. 3 hours. More than 100 practitioners set out together, but there is no news until now. It's ridiculous. Other representatives of the powerful forces were also restless. Child Chi, didn't your Azure Light Pavilion send 2 Earth Gang practitioners for this action? Why there is no news until now? Suddenly, someone looked at Qi Tianxing. His words attracted everyone's attention. Qi Tianxing looked gloomy at the moment. He was no longer as calm and composed as before. He was also anxious. Hearing this, he said impatiently, "You ask me? Who should I ask?" I remember that the abnormal assassin, Residual Wind, also participated in the action. He still doesn't show up at this time. Has something happened to him? Someone suddenly mentioned Residual Wind. Qi Tianxing was stunned, and his face became more gloomy. He gritted his teeth and said, "Everyone, you are not here to laugh at Azure Light Pavilion, are you?" Everyone shook their heads. Qi Tianxing snapped, "Since you are not here to laugh at us, shut up. You are anxious, but I am not." Suddenly, the atmosphere became silent. Many people didn't dare to say more for fear of angering Qi Tianxing. But the anxiety and uneasiness in their hearts were getting stronger and stronger. Bang! At this time, the door was pushed open, and a strong figure came in. It was Chang Henshui, but he looked dignified and frowned at the moment, looking worried. "Child, the situation has changed tonight. I'm afraid the action will end in vain." As soon as he came in, Chang Henshui said in a deep voice. Just a few words made the whole audience burst into an uproar. Even if they had already guessed that there might be changes in this action, they still couldn't believe it when it was confirmed by Chang Henshui. How could it be possible? Can a young man of human gang realm from a poor family defeat the joint action of more than a dozen forces? Nonsense. They are all useless. There was an uproar in the hall. Qi Tianxing was so angry that he slammed the table and roared, "All of you, shut up." Immediately, he looked at Chang Henshui and said, "Tell me what's going on. If you dare to be alarmist, I will be the first to kill you." Chang Henshui came to report the news with good intentions, but was scolded by Qi Tianxing, a young man from a rich and powerful family, which made him angry. But in order to continue his cultivation in Azure Light Pavilion in the future, he had to bear it, and said, "As far as I know, Lu Zhong and Residual Wind are dead, and I'm afraid that more than half of the 173 practitioners who were dispatched tonight have been lost." Before he finished, the hall was in an uproar. Exclamations came from all directions, and everyone was shouting and screaming as if their parents had died. Chapter 219. The main hall was in a mess, filled with noise and clamor. Everyone's face was full of panic and doubt. The news brought back by Chang Henshui was so shocking that they couldn't accept it for a while. A young man in human gang realm. How could he do this? Originally, they all thought that they could easily kill this young man from a poor family with such a large number of people in this action. Unexpectedly, the development of the situation was completely beyond their expectation. Not only did they fail to kill the young man, but they suffered heavy losses. Chang Henshui couldn't help but feel a deep disdain in his heart when he saw these representatives of the rich and powerful families, who used to be dignified and superior, acting like frightened mice. However, Chang Henshui also knew that the background of the rich and powerful forces was extremely terrible. Not every clansman was so unbearable. On the contrary, the real top strongmen and powerful figures often came from the rich and powerful forces. The reason was very simple. Only the rich and powerful forces with great power and massive cultivation resources could cultivate the top strongmen far beyond the ordinary. In contrast, the poor children had already lost innately. Don't panic, everyone. Although the situation is serious, there is still a chance to reverse the situation. Qi Tianxing suddenly spoke in a deep voice, suppressing the panic in the hall and restoring the atmosphere to calm. All eyes looked at Qi Tianxing as if they wanted to know what other tricks he had hidden. Qi Tianxing said with a gloomy face, "We underestimated the terrible strength of our opponent before, which caused such a loss. I think you all know that it's difficult to change anything with our current strength, so there's only one thing we have to do now." He took a deep breath and gritted his teeth. "Ask for help. Ask for help." Everyone in the hall was stunned, and their faces changed. It was too shameful to ask for help at this time, and they might even be punished for their incompetence. Everyone, things have developed to this point. If we let Lin Sun leave alive tonight, I believe that from tomorrow on, more than a dozen forces will become the laughingstock of Mist City, and we will never be able to raise our heads again. Qi Tianxing had regained his composure at this moment. Think about it. A young man from a poor family defeated more than a dozen of our forces. What would all the practitioners in Mist City feel if this matter was spread out? Everyone's face changed again. Obviously, they all realized the seriousness of the problem. Well, I'm going to ask for support from the clan. That's the only way. Well, it's not a big deal to lose face. If I can't kill Lin Sun, it will be a big deal. Following this, the representatives from the major factions voiced out one after another to agree with Qi Tianxing's suggestion. At this point, Qi Tianxing breathed a sigh of relief, but he knew very well that even if he killed Lin Sun tonight, the impact would be different. This was no longer a show of power, but a counterattack to save face. What was more, because of the amazing fighting power Lin Sun showed tonight, even if he was killed, it would inevitably cause a shock. Don't forget that Lin Sun was a teenager who was qualified to participate in the province test. Moreover, he possessed such outstanding combat strength. Now that such a young elite had been killed by their forces, what would the upper echelons of the empire think if news of this were spread to them? Just thinking about it was enough to know how bad the impact of this matter was. But now that they were riding a tiger, they could only do so. Qi Tianxing only hoped that tonight's matter would end quickly and there would be no more waves. Witnessing all this, Chang Henshui couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. He realized that no matter how powerful Lin Sun was tonight, he could not escape death when these forces sent the real top figures. Was this the fate of the poor? Chang Henshui inexplicably had a touch of pity in his heart. Boom! But when people in the hall were about to take action and ask for support from their respective forces, a loud noise suddenly sounded. The door of the hall was smashed by a huge force, and a young man dressed in black walked in with a straight posture. The teenager was soaked with rain, and there were still many scars on his body. The blood stained his black clothes, which made him look a little embarrassed. But his expression was calm and composed. His black eyes were deep and tranquil like an ancient well, and his angular and handsome face even carried a trace of a warm smile. In his hand, there was a black saber with many notches on the blade, and there were even traces of blood stains on the blade. But it was this saber that gave the youth an austere, iron-blooded aura. When he walked into the hall, an indescribable killing intent spread out like a cold current, freezing the air in the field. Lin Sun, Qi Tianxing, and others were shocked and stopped what they were doing. Their eyes were dilated, and they couldn't believe that the teenager took the initiative to come to them. It was more than audacious. It was simply bullying them. It was too rampant. Even Chang Henshui was stunned and shocked. Lin Sun was too unscrupulous. Did he already hold the idea of fighting to the death and wanted to kill at all costs? Everyone, sorry to keep you waiting, Lin Sun said with a smile. His voice was calm and indifferent, but it made everyone in the hall tremble. Before he came here, Lin Sun had forced a practitioner to tell him that the people gathered in the hall this time were all from more than a dozen forces, and they were not important. They were just representatives with average cultivation. Bastard! How dare you be rampant when you are about to die? A practitioner was furious and felt that his dignity was challenged. Puff! Lin Sun's figure flashed, and his saber cut off the opponent's head in an instant. Blood burst out from the neck like a fountain. Everyone was shocked. No one had expected that the teenager was so powerful that he not only dared to break in alone, but also killed people without saying a word. They didn't even have time to react. They were shocked and angry when they saw the practitioner was killed. Chang Henshui, what are you doing? Kill him! Kill him! Qi Tianxing shouted loudly. Other practitioners fled in panic. Thinking of Lin Sun's achievements tonight, they didn't even dare to have the slightest idea of charging and killing. This was power. Lin Sun seemed to come alone, but before he came, many practitioners had died in his hands, including powerful figures such as Lu Zhong and Residual Wind. Under such circumstances, how could these representatives of powerful forces in the hall, whose cultivation was only mediocre, dare to fight with Lin Sun? Chang Henshui's face changed. He looked at Lin Sun coldly and finally said decisively, "I'm sorry." With a clang, a long spear appeared in his hand. The whole body was dark purple, and the spear tip was shining with frightening cold light. In an instant, Chang Henshui's momentum suddenly changed and rose, like an iron-blooded general who had fought in all directions. Seeing this scene, Qi Tianxing and others all breathed a sigh of relief. With Chang Henshui, a strong man of Earthgang realm, they could at least resist for a while. As long as Chang Henshui could entangle Lin Sun, they would have a chance to escape. But when Lin Sun saw Chang Henshui's long spear, he couldn't help but show a strange look in his eyes. Immediately, he ignored Chang Henshui and rushed to Qi Tianxing and others in the distance with a saber. The purpose of his coming was to kill the representatives of these powerful forces. Only in this way could he give them the heaviest blow. At the same time, it was also a warning that those who chose to be Lin Sun's enemy must pay the cruelest price. Seeing this, Chang Henshui's face darkened. Although he knew that Lin Sun's fighting capacity was extremely amazing, he was angry when Lin Sun completely ignored him. He was a strong man of Earthgang realm. He had been practicing hard and had become the first among all the followers of Azure Light Pavilion. But now he was ignored by a young man of Humangang realm, which was too irritating. However, just as he was about to act, Lin Sun's voice suddenly sounded in his ears. "If Master Sun knew that you're going to deal with me with the purple spear he refined for you, he would be very disappointed." Chang Henshui was shocked. Master Sun? This guy actually knew Master Sun. Nowadays, in Mist City, those who didn't know the name of Master Sun were simply different. But so far, no one could be sure who Master Sun was. Because Master Sun's identity was extremely mysterious, and he had unimaginable attainments in spiritual tattoos, the spiritual weapons refined by him were often the best of the best, far more powerful than the spiritual weapons of the same level sold on the market. So just a few days ago, Chang Henshui also went to the commune of spiritual tattooists and posted a refining task, hoping to refine a satisfactory spiritual weapon for himself with the help of Master Sun. Fortunately, just yesterday, Chang Henshui successfully received the purple spear, which was so powerful that he was extremely satisfied and admired Master Sun's means more and more. But he didn't expect that Lin Sun, a young man from a poor family, seemed to have a relationship with Master Sun. If this was true, it would be amazing. After all, Master Sun's identity was so respected that none of the major forces dared to offend him easily. It was unusual that Lin Sun could have a relationship with Master Sun. Of course, it was not ruled out that Lin Sun was deceiving him under the guise of Master Sun, but Chang Henshui dared not think so. What if Lin Sun really had a relationship with Master Sun? Wait, Lin Sun? Master Sun? They both had the word Sun in their names. It would be too much of a coincidence if there was no relationship between them. For a moment, Chang Henshui struggled and hesitated in his heart, forgetting to take action. At this time, Lin Sun had launched a massacre in the hall. His figure was as fast as lightning. His movements were simple, direct, and neat. Every time he chopped, he would kill a practitioner. His means seemed extremely cruel and ruthless. Many shoujo were shocked. They were running, screaming, panicking like stray dogs. But under Lin Sun's targeting, all their struggles seemed to be in vain. There was no other way. The gap between their strength was too great. Although they were both in the Humangang realm, Lin Sun could kill Lu Zhong, a strong man in the Earthgang realm. This was the gap. Chang Henshui, what the fuck are you doing? If I die today, you and the others will die too. Qi Tianxing roared. He was in a precarious situation. At such a critical moment of life and death, Chang Henshui stood there in a daze. How could Qi Tianxing not be angry? P.S. Many students will take part in the college entrance exam tomorrow. Goldfish wishes everyone can be admitted to the university you like. The rock rises with the wind one day and soars up to 90,000 miles. No matter success or failure, you can fight tomorrow and have no regrets. Chapter 220. Chang Henshui was shocked in his heart and suddenly woke up. Only then did he realize that he had just made a big mistake. Even if Lin Sun and Master Sun had something to do with each other, how could he be merciful to Lin Sun at such a moment as a follower of Azure Light Pavilion? In fact, Chang Henshui also knew that the real reason why he hesitated was that he had already given up the idea of dealing with Lin Sun subconsciously. Otherwise, not to mention Master Sun, even if Lin Sun said the name of a more powerful figure, he wouldn't hesitate. Whoosh! Chang Henshui no longer hesitated. With a resolute look, he swept a purple spear in his hand and rushed to Lin Sun in the distance. Earthgang Realm Practitioner's power was totally different. At this moment, Lin Sun felt a chill on his back. Without hesitation, he moved sideways and chopped the spear with his saber. With the rebound force, he suddenly rushed to a practitioner on one side. With a muffled sound, the practitioner had no time to dodge, and his head was chopped off in an instant. At this time, Chang Henshui had taken the initiative to attack. A purple spear danced like a raging python with terrible power. Kill him! Kill him! In the distance, Qi Tianxing screamed again and again. The hall was full of blood. There were more than 10 representatives of powerful forces, but now there were only 5 or 6 people left. If Chang Henshui didn't take action in time, the loss would be more serious. Are you sure you want to be my enemy? Lin Sun frowned and transmitted his voice while fighting fiercely with Chang Henshui. The test just now had made him realize that Chang Henshui obviously didn't want to be his enemy, so Lin Sun didn't immediately use his killing move in the battle. Since I'm a follower of Azure Light Pavilion, how can I watch you act violently in front of me? Chang Henshui looked decisive and merciless. He gave full play to the power of Earthgang Realm, which brought a lot of pressure to Lin Sun. In that case, don't blame me for not giving you a chance. The last hesitation in Lin Sun's heart disappeared. His black eyes were like lightning without any emotion. If he didn't kill Chang Henshui as soon as possible, he would only put himself in danger as time went on. However, when Lin Sun was about to use RFS, his eyelids suddenly jumped and a sense of danger rose in his heart. Without hesitation, he flashed and rushed to the distance. Buzz! At practically the exact same moment, an extremely sharp howl resounded. The air was torn apart like a piece of cloth, and one could clearly see an arrow that was gorgeous like a divine ray of light rumbled as it shot over violently from outside the window at the side of the hall. With a bang, the ground where Lin Sun was standing was blown up. The whole tide-watching pavilion shook violently and was on the verge of collapse. Chang Henshui's face suddenly changed. What a terrible arrow! Qi Tianxing and the remaining representatives of the powerful clans were stunned for a moment, and then they couldn't help but feel ecstatic. The reinforcements had arrived. Reinforcements had arrived. However, when they looked at Lin Sun again, they found that Lin Sun had already disappeared in the hall. Damn it, he actually escaped. Qi Tianxing was so angry that his eyes almost popped out. He pointed at Chang Henshui and said, Chang Henshui, how dare you deliberately let Lin Sun win just now, so that Lin Sun could be fierce here again and again. You will pay for it. Chang Henshui's eyes narrowed, and a touch of anger and killing intent surged uncontrollably in his heart. He couldn't wait to kill Qi Tianxing, the playboy, but in the end, he restrained himself and snorted. Child Qi, if I didn't help you just now, I'm afraid you would have been killed. After that, he turned around and left. Qi Tianxing trembled with anger and roared, You're just a henchman. You don't know how to admit your mistake. How do you talk back to me? You are so lawless. Young Master Qi, that friend is right. If you listen to my advice, you should take your people and leave immediately. We didn't come here just to save you, said the middle-aged man with a smile. Suddenly, a dull, dry and stiff voice came from outside the hall. Qi Tianxing and the remaining representatives of the powerful clans all changed their faces. Wasn't it their reinforcements who helped Lin Sun just now? Who are you? Qi Tianxing gathered up his courage and asked. Rain-tasting tower, Outside the window, the dry and dull voice said a name and then disappeared completely. Rain-tasting tower. Qi Tianxing and others were shocked. This should also help Lin's son. On the street, the rainstorm was like a waterfall, crashing between heaven and earth. The night was still as dark as ink. Occasionally, lightning tore the void and bloomed with dazzling and frightening luster. Ghost Moon casually walked on the street. Her slender and graceful body was completely exposed to the rainstorm, as if she was strolling in the rain with indescribable comfort. She was an assassin of Rain-Tasting Tower. Over the years, she had carried out hundreds of missions and only failed a few times. She was known as one of the most dangerous assassins of Rain-Tasting Tower. Suddenly, she stopped on the street while she looked towards a row upon row of houses in the distance, and a wisp of a gorgeous smile suffused the corners of her scarlet-red lips. "Friend, hiding won't solve the problem. Why don't you come out and have a good fight?" Her voice was as pleasant as an oriole's. The rainstorm poured between heaven and earth. Except for the sound of the rain, no one answered for a long time. Ghost Moon seemed to be very patient. She stood there and kept looking at that side. She said, "You can't escape. This area has been blocked. Now I can give you a fair chance to fight. If you don't cherish it, then I can only—" Before she finished speaking, a chuckle suddenly came from a house in the distance, shrouded in rainstorm. "Don't talk to me about fairness. You don't deserve it." Ghost Moon pursed her scarlet lips, revealing a wild and coquettish smile. "Friend, you've been exposed." Swish! In an instant, her figure left a residual shadow in the void and rushed over there at an incredible speed. But halfway there, her pupils suddenly dilated, as if she had seen something incomparably terrifying, and her coquettish face suddenly changed. Swish! She twisted her body at a jaw-dropping angle and leaped into the air. Her figure suddenly rose high and rushed toward the sky. But at the same time, an illusory and blurry arrow silently flashed by and pierced through his left leg. Puff! Blood spurted out, and Guei Yu's figure suddenly staggered, like a wild goose that had been shot, and fell to the ground. This caused Ghost Moon to be shocked in her heart, and she was extremely astounded. What archery technique is this? It's so strange. Relying on her many years of experience in assassinations, Ghost Moon instantly recovered her calm. Before her figure could fall, she suddenly exerted force within her body and dodged to the side like a flickering ray of light. Her archery technique was too strange. It was soundless and impossible to guard against, so Ghost Moon didn't dare attack head-on. Watch out! When Ghost Moon hadn't even arrived beneath the eaves at the side of the street, a hoarse and stiff shout resounded by her ears. "It's the gray mink." Ghost Moon was horrified in her heart. She successively made over 10 shocking dodging movements, and then she used her body to smash through a wall and charge in. Watch out! But when she just flashed into the damaged house, the gray mink's voice resounded once more by her ears, and it caused her expression to change while a wisp of astonishment couldn't help but surge into her heart. What exactly is going on? She didn't know because from the beginning until the end, she hadn't been able to catch a trace of danger, and this was the most terrifying part. Ghost Moon suddenly took a deep breath before she dodged once more. She couldn't be bothered about all that any longer, and the important matter at hand was to protect herself. At the same time, she was clearly aware in her heart that the assassination assignment she'd accepted this time was even more dangerous than she'd expected. All of this took a long time to describe, yet it actually occurred in an instant, and it was extremely dangerous. Ghost Moon had become accustomed to all of this since a long time ago. The assassinations she'd carried out in these past few years had allowed her to become accustomed to such a tense and dangerous atmosphere. However, she frowned because the gray mink's voice actually didn't resound again in the following period of time. The gray mink was her companion. It was skilled in concealment and possessed an innately acute ability to sense danger. In the past few years, the two of them had always carried out assassinations together, and their cooperation was extremely good. Ghost Moon had been able to deal with many lethal dangers by relying on the gray mink's cover. Just like this time, it was similarly the gray mink that had helped her greatly from the shadows. However, unlike the past, the gray mink didn't show itself immediately after it warned her this time, and it seemed as if it had vanished instead. This caused Ghost Moon to faintly feel that something was off. Suddenly, a shrill cry resounded from afar. Ghost Moon's expression changed abruptly. "It's the gray mink!" Swoosh! Without the slightest hesitation, Ghost Moon flashed towards the distance. She couldn't be bothered about any danger. The gray mink had saved her life more than once, so how could she watch helplessly as the gray mink died? Fortunately, she didn't encounter any danger all along the way, but her heart couldn't help but sink when she saw the gray mink. At this moment, the gray mink was lying in a pool of water on the street, and he was barely breathing. His thin and firm face was ghastly pale, whereas there was a horrifying bloody hole on his abdomen, and fresh blood was gurgling out from it. That was the vital point of the Sea of Chi, and it was where the pool of spiritual energy converged. It was the foundation of a cultivator's cultivation, yet now a bloody hole had been pierced through it. Undoubtedly, the gray mink's cultivation had been crippled. Ghost Moon felt her head drone as if she'd been struck by lightning. You don't worry. When that kid attacked earlier, he suffered Boss Residual Snow's counterattack and was heavily injured. Now, Boss Residual Snow has already pursued him, and I believe it won't be long before we'll be able to complete this assignment. The gray mink said in a hoarse and dry voice, as if to comfort Ghost Moon, but I'm afraid I can't act with you in the future. A touch of sadness appeared on Ghost Moon's face. She squatted down and held the gray mink in her arms. She took a deep breath and said, "Tell me, where did that kid go?" Her voice was filled with incomparable hatred. The gray mink grabbed her arm and said, "This is the fate of an assassin. Failure means death. It's good enough for me to keep my life. You've already been injured, so don't be impulsive. Just leave everything to Boss Residual Snow." Ghost Moon still wanted to say something, but the gray mink gritted his teeth and said, "You listen to me for once. Our opponent this time is extremely cunning and cruel. If you go, you'll drag Boss Residual Snow down." Ghost Moon's expression changed. She felt hatred and anger in her heart, and she was extremely aggrieved and sad. She said, I'm so unwilling." Suddenly, a rough and lazy voice sounded in the distant rainstorm. "Chick, it's normal to be unwilling. If you die, you won't even have the chance to be unwilling." Who? Chapter 221. In the torrential rain, a tall and majestic figure came over. His appearance was rough, his eyebrows were sparse, his bare chest was as hard as a rock, and he was carrying a huge wine jar in his hand. His eyes were drowsy, just like a drunkard. However, at this moment, when he came over, he was like a mountain walking between heaven and earth with a kind of oppressive and disdainful aura. The heavy rain poured down from the sky, but it dared not approach him at all. This man was Shu Jin. Ghost Moon and Gray Martin felt an inexplicable chill in their hearts. They felt an indescribable oppression, as if they were ants looking up at a towering mountain. A real assassin should not have feelings. Shu Jin's gaze swept across the two of them. He seemed to have thought of something. He sighed and said, "You too can leave. Go back and ask your master if he still remembers Tsung Mountain blood at sunset." Ghost Moon and Gray Martin looked at each other, hesitated for a moment, and finally gritted their teeth and left in a hurry. Shu Jin watched them leave, and suddenly a smile appeared on his lips. He carried the wine jar and drank wildly in the heavy rain. Bang! The wine was finished, and the jar was broken. Shu Jin let out a long breath, and his eyes suddenly looked into the distance. At this moment, his drowsy eyes suddenly flashed with a terrifying electric light, as if a pair of thunder vortexes were surging. Almost at the same time, in the darkness far away, a light voice suddenly sounded, and then a thin and slender figure walked out and approached in the blink of an eye. This person was dressed in a black, wide-sleeved robe and had 3 wisps of willow whiskers on his chin. He had the demeanor of an immortal, and every movement he made seemed to connect with the heavens. His gaze seemed indifferent, but a casual sweep of his gaze revealed a shocking power that caused one's heart to tremble. May I ask who you are, my friend? The man's temperament was as deep as an abyss. He stood 300 meters away and looked at Shu Jin from afar. The heavy rain between heaven and earth seemed to be imprisoned by an invisible force and could no longer get close to this area of 300 meters. Shu Jin smiled. It doesn't matter who I am. What's important is that you, Yao Tuahai, actually want to fight with a junior tonight, which really surprised me. The sage-like man was Yao Tuahai. If Lin Sun were here and saw such a scene, it was unknown what he would think in his heart. But Yao Tuahai's face darkened, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. In fact, he was a little surprised. He didn't know Shu Jin's identity, but from his aura, he smelled a terrifying power that didn't belong to him at all. Are you here to stop me? Yao Tuahai probed. Shu Jin laughed and said, Do you think you are qualified to make me do this? Enough with the nonsense. Tonight's matter is more or less over. It's time to wrap things up. If you don't think it's enough, then you'll have to go through me first. Yao Tuahai narrowed his eyes. Are you here to protect Lin Sun? Shu Jin scratched his head and said, I guess so. Hearing this, Yao Tuahai's heart sank. He never thought that Lin Sun had a strong protector who was not inferior to Tao Insight Realm. Yao Tuahai took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, In this case, I'm very curious whether you can protect him. As a famous cultivator in the southwestern province, who could stand shoulder to shoulder with Governor Lu Wujuan, Yao Tuahai would naturally not be frightened by a sentence. Shu Jin frowned and seemed to be a little impatient. He said, I know that no matter how much nonsense you talk, it's better to solve it with fists. Before he could finish his sentence, he took a big step forward and threw out a punch. Boom! It was a simple punch, but it seemed to have pierced through the void, and it revealed an unstoppable and majestic aura. It could be clearly seen that the void in this area was squeezed severely and collapsed inch by inch, producing a sharp and harsh sonic boom that made the world pale. Yao Tuahai's face changed slightly, and dazzling cyan light suddenly gushed out of his body and rushed straight to the sky, making his power rise to the extreme in an instant. Buzz, almost at the same time, he clasped his 5 fingers and condensed a handprint. The cyan light was flowing, dazzling, and he slapped it out fiercely. At this moment, in the governor's mansion, Lu Wujuan, who was concentrating on cultivation, suddenly opened his eyes, and a touch of surprise flashed between his eyebrows. In Mist College, Wei Lingjin, who was playing chess, and Du Dongtu, the commander of Xiling army, all felt something. They stopped what they were doing and looked in the same direction. In the rain-enjoying tower, Ting Yu, who was sitting cross-legged and playing the zither alone, played an imperceptible noise with his fingertips. But he seemed to be unaware of it and frowned at the distance outside the window. On a stormy night, there were strong practitioners of Tao Insight Realm fighting in Mist City. This thought flashed in the hearts of Lu Wujuan, Wei Lingjin, Du Dongtu, Ting Yu, and others, which made them all surprised. There were strong practitioners of Tao Insight Realm participating in the battle tonight, but when they tried to perceive something, they found nothing, as if it was just an illusion and nothing had happened. They couldn't help but be surprised and bewildered by this. At the same time, on the long street, there was a loud bang, and the terrible and dazzling light scattered like a wanton storm. But between heaven and earth, there seemed to be an invisible wall, blocking all the wanton spread of power. As a result, the buildings around the street were preserved in perfect condition. Otherwise, according to the power released by this blow, at least all the buildings, creatures, and lives within 100 miles would be destroyed. Boom! In the void, Yao Tuahai staggered back. His whole body was overflowing with green light, which was incomparably blazing. Obviously, he had urged his cultivation to the extreme. In front of him, a fist light rushed to him, oppressing the void to collapse, full of an unparalleled momentum to crush everything. This was the punch that Shu Jin had just punched. Just one blow had smashed Yao Tuahai's palm print and forced him to stagger back. And until this moment, Yao Tuahai had not been able to completely resolve the power of this punch. What especially made Yao Tuahai's heart palpitate was that after Shu Jin's punch, he still had enough power to lock in all directions, preventing the power of their battle from spreading out. Who the hell is this guy? Yao Tuahai was shocked. He had reached the Tao Insight realm for decades, and he thought that in the whole Southwest province, there were only a few people who could compete with him. Who would have thought that the strange man he saw tonight would suppress him to the point where he almost couldn't hold on with just one punch? From this, it could be judged that the strange man's cultivation and combat effectiveness were at least one level higher than his. Or even more. Boom! The fist light was still rushing forward. It was simple, and there was nothing dazzling or shocking about it, but the kind of momentum that crushed everything and pressed forward was so terrible. Bang! In the end, Yao Tuahai was actually unable to resist this punch, and it forcefully smashed onto his chest. His entire body instantly felt as if it was crushed by a divine mountain, and his figure was blasted flying while he coughed up large mouthfuls of blood without end. His countenance had already become ghastly pale while his eyes were filled with shock. He'd lost his calm and sage-like appearance from before, and he seemed to be in a rather sorry state. Clatter at this time, a rough smile appeared on Shu Jin's lips, and he gently pressed his hands in the void. Suddenly, the violent power between heaven and earth was erased, and the world returned to its original appearance. The heavy rain poured down as if nothing had happened just now. This scene could be described as turning the rotten into the magical, incredible. Yao Tuahai looked at this scene in a daze, and his pale face changed constantly. He looked at Shu Jin in the distance with a deep fear in his eyes. Who on earth was this man? Just one punch could make the world change color, and it was full of unscrupulous and domineering momentum. In the whole empire, there seemed to be few practitioners of Tao Insight realm who had such means. I have no intention of interfering in the grievances between you and Lin, but in this mist city, no one can deal with him under my eyes. After saying this, Shu Jin turned around and strode away. His majestic figure soon disappeared in the vast curtain of rain. Yao Tuahai was shocked. What did this sentence mean? He was a little uncertain. He pondered alone in the rain for a long time, and finally turned away with a gloomy face. Tonight's encounter was so abrupt that Yao Tuahai also had a touch of fear in his heart. He dare not take other actions rashly. At this time, in the depths of a remote and dilapidated street, Lin Sun curled up his body and lay quietly in the shadow of a low house. He restrained his breath and let the rain wash him like a lifeless stone. At this moment, his face was slightly pale, and most of his strength had been consumed. What was more serious was that there was a shocking bloody hole on the left side of his chest, which almost pierced his heart. This was left by Residual Snow, an assassin from Tingyu Tower. When dealing with Ghost Moon and Grey Martin, Lin forced Ghost Moon to dodge and seek self-protection with the insignificant bow in his hand. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Lin finally locked on Grey Martin, who was hiding in another place, and shot an arrow through the ocean of chi of Grey Martin without hesitation. But Lin never thought that when he locked on Grey Martin, he was also locked on by Residual Snow, who was hiding on the other side. Almost at the same time, Lin had no time to dodge and was seriously injured. In this case, Lin had to choose to escape. Tonight's fierce battle had lasted until now, which had consumed a lot of his energy. In addition, he was seriously injured, so Lin could only seek self-protection. Unexpectedly, Residual Snow was chasing him all the way like a maggot attached to a bone, and Lin couldn't get rid of him at all. This situation was very dangerous. If he continued to escape like this, the first one to fall down would inevitably be the seriously injured Lin. Therefore, Lin chose to fight back without hesitation. He didn't know who Residual Snow was, but it was very clear that this guy had extremely terrible attainments in archery, which was even stronger than Residual Wind. This kind of opponent was undoubtedly the most difficult and dangerous to deal with. Fortunately, Lin had insignificant bow. After 1 year of training in Bloodthirsty Camp, he also mastered the assassination and stealth skills that were not inferior to Residual Snow. Therefore, in the stormy night, Lin Sun and Residual Snow launched a tit-for-tat assassination silently. Chapter 222. Lin Sun's hidden figure seemed to have no breath like a rock, but inside his body, the nature insight and spirit devour scripture was running slowly. He was seriously injured, and his physical strength was also greatly consumed. When he hid before, he had swallowed a whole bottle of sapphire gang-refining pills. At this moment, with the running of the nature insight and spirit devour scripture, the huge efficacy of the pills was constantly refined to supplement the lost strength in his body. But this could only solve the urgent problem. The key was that the injury caused by the bloody hole in his chest was too serious to be healed in a short time. Therefore, the longer he delayed, the more dangerous it would be for Lin Sun. But his opponent this time was an extremely experienced and ruthless assassin. To kill such a person, patience and strength were the key. Lin Sun had no time to deal with him patiently. Whoosh! Suddenly, Lin Sun took a deep breath and arched his body quietly. This subtle movement made him expose a trace of power fluctuation. Boom! Almost at the same time, in the darkness in the distance, a snow-like arrow burst out and swept towards Lin Sun fiercely. A terrible whistling sound broke through the air, which was soul-stirring. Lin Sun's figure flashed, and he suddenly turned over and rushed to the distance. The eaves where he was originally was shattered in a roar. The northwest corner is still 1,900 zhang away. An accurate judgment flashed through Lin Sun's mind. His figure didn't stop at all and kept flashing forward in the rainstorm night. The fighting characteristics of his opponent this time were very obvious, which was stability. Regardless of whether it was his stealth or the speed and strength of his attacks, he maintained an extraordinary level of stability. From the beginning until the end, he didn't reveal a single flaw. Undoubtedly, it was the most terrible thing to be targeted by such an enemy. As long as there was a little carelessness, the opponent would seize the opportunity to carry out a fatal blow. Just like the attack just now, when Lin Sun made a move, he was sure that the opponent would definitely attack and keep a distance of 9,000 feet. Obviously, within this distance, the opponent could fully exert the most powerful means of attack. If he was not injured, Lin Sun was confident that he could deal with him and see whose assassination skill was more powerful. But now he could only keep dodging and escaping, and then look for the best opportunity to attack in the process. There was no other way. With his current strength, he could only use the power of insignificant Bao once again. No more than that. In other words, for Lin Sun, there was only one chance to kill this opponent tonight. If he failed, he would lose the ability to counterattack. While Lin was dodging, a figure was also moving forward in the night. His figure was like a wisp of smoke, constantly shuttling between the streets and eaves, silent and ethereal like a ghost. Although his speed was not fast, he maintained a constant rhythm. This person was Residual Snow, a top assassin from the Tingyu Tower, who had the powerful cultivation of the Heaven Gang realm. Residual Snow was known as the ace assassin of Rain Listening Tower because he had never failed once in the assassination mission carried out by him. At this moment, he was carrying a strange rattan bow on his back and a bowl-sized quiver on his waist. The quiver was filled with neatly arranged arrows. The numerous arrows were completely dark green in color, and the tips of the arrows revealed the shape of leaves. The bodies of the arrows were branded with specks of snow-white starlight, and they seemed as if they were embedded with numerous tiny stars, causing them to be extremely strange. The rattan bow was called Snow Mud Spiritual Bow. It was a top-grade spiritual weapon of human rank, refined by a spiritual tattoo master himself. It was an extremely precious and rare treasure, which had been passed down for hundreds of years. The matching arrows were called Big Claw Spiritual Arrows. Each arrow was engraved with a unique spiritual tattoo pattern and contained terrible power. An arrow like this was worth about 500 imperial silver coins. With the strength and archery skills possessed by Residual Snow, he could exert unimaginable power with his set of bows and arrows. But when carrying out the task tonight, Residual Snow couldn't help frowning. His opponent was just a teenager of Human Gang realm, but his combat effectiveness was unexpectedly strong. It was the fourth time that he attacked tonight, but he still failed to kill Lin, which made Residual Snow feel serious. Through the fight, Residual Snow had clearly realized that this teenager named Lin was really unusual. Lin seemed to be embarrassed and had to dodge all the way, but he didn't leave any flaw from beginning to end. What surprised Residual Snow most was that although he could capture Lin's breath from beginning to end, as long as he was about to lock on Lin, Lin would avoid him all at once. So he couldn't find the best time to attack. This was incredible. It was the first time that Residual Snow had met such a difficult opponent since he carried out the task. The most terrible thing was that this opponent was just a teenager of Human Gang realm, and he could still avoid his targeting and attacks again and again when he was seriously injured. This series of discoveries made Residual Snow involuntarily admire him. It was really hard to imagine where this young man came from and why his fighting skills were so brilliant. But the more it was like this, the more determined Residual Snow was to kill Lin. Although he had no grievance with Lin, he was an assassin. His responsibility was to kill Lin and complete the task. This was the basic integrity that an assassin must have. Suddenly, a cold light flashed in Residual Snow's eyes, and he noticed that the opponent lurked again. Whoosh! He found the best position to hide in a flash, grabbed the snow mud spiritual bow, and put a big claw spiritual arrow on the bowstring. His movements were as smooth as flowing water, completed in one go. Almost at the same time, a dangerous breath like a sharp blade pierced Residual Snow's eyes, and he knew that the opponent was capturing his breath. This caused a wisp of a teasing arc to arise on the corners of his mouth. Has this little fellow finally lost his patience? Residual Snow quietly exerted strength on his fingertips, pulled the bowstring to the fullest, and waited for the moment. He had absolute confidence that he could kill the opponent first at the moment when the opponent locked him. But what made Residual Snow frown was that the opponent soon gathered his breath, and the dangerous breath disappeared. It seemed that he was going to escape again. "You will lose your life if you hesitate," Residual Snow murmured in his heart. He was ready to get up and chase after Lin as before. However, right at this instant, he suddenly noticed that a trace of an imperceptible fluctuation of aura had suddenly appeared in his opponent's extremely well-concealed figure 900 m away. Opportunity. With his many years of assassination experience, Residual Snow immediately judged that the opponent should have an accident at this moment, and it was very likely that his physical strength had been unable to support. This was definitely not a means of luring the enemy, because no one would be stupid enough to expose his breath to lure the enemy, which was no different from courting death. Bang! In an instant, Residual Snow had made a decision. A big claw spiritual arrow suddenly burst out, like a bright divine rainbow, rushing through the rainy night, flowing with dazzling light. Lin Sun did have an accident, which caught him off guard. He was originally hiding himself and looking for an opportunity to counterattack, yet never had he imagined that before he could finish doing all this, he felt his right palm tremble abruptly. Although this movement was extremely subtle, it was the most fatal flaw at such a dangerous time. Lin Sun couldn't help narrowing his eyes and cursing inwardly. Almost subconsciously, he was about to dodge, but then something unexpected happened. A fiery red luster suddenly rushed out from the center of his right palm, turning into a round and soft sphere, the surface of which seemed to be burning with flames. Soon after, a pair of round eyes opened on the surface of the sphere, a round nose protruded out, and a round mouth opened to reveal a pair of round ears. Chirp! Lin Sun's eyes widened at once. He never thought that Chirp, who had been sleeping for several months, would suddenly wake up at such a critical moment. Immediately, Lin Sun's heart thumped, and a cold feeling of extreme danger surged in his heart. It was like a sharp knife, which stimulated Lin Sun's pores. In his field of vision, a bright light was suddenly enlarging. Damn it! Lin Sun's face was livid. Almost instinctively, he wanted to hold Chirp and block the blow with his own body. Chirp! But right at this critical moment, Cho-Cho suddenly let out a cheer, and then its figure flashed before it suddenly opened its mouth and swallowed that wisp of snow-white light. Lin Sun was stunned at once at this time. It was Chirp who blocked the blow for him. Lin Sun was shocked, But before he could react, he saw Chirp's round and soft body bouncing up and down on the ground like a ball that had been shaken away. Chirps kept making cheering sounds, as if it was fun to do so. This Lin Sun felt a little confused. That was an extremely powerful and lethal arrow, but it was actually eaten by Chio in a single bite. And from the looks of it, Chio seemed to be very happy. Immediately, Lin Sun suddenly woke up. There was no time to explore all this. He suddenly pulled the insignificance bow and aimed at the distance. At this time, it was the best time to fight back. Residual Snow had planned to pack up his things and leave 1,900 meters away. After all, he was confident that Lin Sun had no chance to survive under that arrow. Who would have thought that at the last moment, one of his great claw spiritual arrows would be swallowed by a little monster that looked like a ball? That was the most powerful arrow shot by him through the Snow Mud Spirit Bow, which was worth 500 silver coins and was used by him with all his essence, chi, and spirit. It was powerful enough to kill a Heaven Gang realm practitioner. But now it was actually swallowed by a little thing like a ball. How could this be possible? Even with Residual Snow's rock-hard state of mind, he couldn't help but have a fluctuation at this moment. His pupils dilated as if he had seen a ghost. This unforeseen event happened too quickly, so quickly that he wondered if the heavens were playing a joke on him. Chapter 223. It was too late to dodge. At the most dangerous moment, Residual Shui chose to save himself. He crossed his hands to protect his head and chest. Bang! As soon as he finished this action, a silent spiritual arrow came, piercing his left arm directly and making a bloody hole in the place where his heart was protected by his left arm. Blood burst out. Residual Shui let out a muffled groan and staggered to the ground. A sharp pain surged all over his body, and he almost fainted. Residual Snow suddenly gasped for breath. When he realized that the spiritual arrow was only an inch away from piercing his heart, he couldn't help but feel cold all over and sweat profusely. If he hadn't protected his heart with his left arm just now, Residual Shui's face was pale, and he couldn't help shivering because of the sharp pain. He didn't dare to think about it anymore. He quickly swallowed several kinds of medicine to control his injury. Then he breathed a sigh of relief and struggled to get up, enduring the sharp pain all over his body. Fortunately, the opponent didn't shoot another arrow, otherwise he would have died at this moment. However, when Residual Shui looked around again, he couldn't find the trace of the opponent. Obviously, the opponent had taken the opportunity to escape. Residual Shui didn't know whether he should be glad or angry. He stood alone in the heavy rain with a complicated look. This was the first time that he failed in carrying out a task in these years, and he was defeated by a seriously injured teenager of Human Gang realm. But Residual Shui didn't have any strong sense of shame, because he knew that he was lucky to survive this time. Lin Sun, I will remember you. After a long time, Residual Shui murmured, turned around and left, resisting the sharp pain all over his body. Until now, he didn't understand what the little ball-shaped monster that suddenly appeared just now was. How could it swallow his strongest arrow in one gulp? Whoosh! The heavy rain was still pouring. Lin Sun ran awkwardly in the rain. In his arms, Chirps kept making a clear sound. Lin Sun smiled bitterly. He couldn't hold it anymore, but this little thing kept cheering. It was really heartless. Lin Sun really couldn't hold it anymore. The arrow shot just now had almost exhausted the remaining strength in his body. Now, he could only rely on his physical strength to run away. If not, how could he let Residual Shui live? If there's a chance in the future, I'll play with this guy again. Thinking of what happened tonight, Lin Sun felt unreconciled and helpless. But there was nothing he could do. After all, he was fighting alone tonight. But thinking of the harvest of tonight's battle, Lin Sun was quite satisfied. At least the practitioners sent by more than a dozen forces had suffered heavy losses. More than half of them were either dead or injured, and he survived in the end, which was a good result. Suddenly, a burst of applause rang out. It was so ear-piercing in this rainy night. Ha ha ha, it's really amazing. Graduates of the bloodthirsty camp really have the fighting capacity to fight against 1,000 as rumored. With a burst of rough laughter, Shu Jin appeared and looked at Lin Sun with a smile, with a touch of appreciation in his eyes. From the beginning of tonight's battle, Shu Jin had seen all of Lin Sun's actions and performance. To be honest, Lin Sun's fighting capacity and tenacious and ruthless style were completely beyond Shu Jin's original expectation. He had thought that it would be good if Lin Sun could hold on until half of the battle, but the result showed that even if he didn't help, Lin Sun could solve these problems by himself. Of course, the premise was that he didn't meet the overmatches like Yao Tuahai. But even so, for a human gang realm teenager to be able to achieve this step, it was already amazing and rare in the world. At least among the young overmatches of the Empire that Shu Jin knew before, there might be some who could completely suppress Lin Sun in cultivation, but almost no one could finish a battle with almost no chance of winning alone like Lin Sun. Therefore, at this moment, Shu Jin's applause and admiration were not joking, but really from the bottom of his heart. Seeing Shu Jin, Lin Sun was completely relieved, and then he felt extremely painful all over, as if he was exhausted. He couldn't help but grit his teeth and scold. "I thought you wouldn't show up tonight." Shu Jin laughed. "Didn't you say that I would show up in time when you needed me? But I find that you don't need my help at all tonight." Lin Sun couldn't help but roll his eyes and said, "I've killed him, and the battle seems to be over. The rest is up to you." After saying this, he closed his eyes and fainted at once. Shu Jin's heart trembled. He hurriedly stepped forward and picked up Lin Sun's body. After a little examination, his expression couldn't help but change slightly. In his perception, Lin Sun was almost on the verge of exhaustion at the moment, and the injury on his chest was quite serious. He couldn't imagine how Lin Sun persisted until now under such circumstances. Looking at Lin Sun's pale but slightly handsome face and the firm curve at the corner of his tightly pursed lips, Shu Jin was silent for a moment. With a touch of complexity in his eyes, he finally sighed, "Well, I'll do you another favor." Saying this, he had already carried Lin Sun and disappeared in the vast rainy night. No one knew when the heavy rain over Mist City stopped. In the dark night, there were dense, bright stars, which were particularly clear and quiet. In an exquisite and gorgeous courtyard of azure light pavilion, Qi Shaokong was sitting in a pavilion in the courtyard, drinking by himself comfortably. Every night, he liked to drink alone. Qi Shaokong was the leader of Azure Light Pavilion and the current patriarch of the Qi clan. He had a high position and a great reputation. He was a first-class figure in Mist City. "How's it going tonight?" Suddenly, Qi Shaokong thought of something and asked aloud. On the side of the pavilion, an old servant stood respectfully. Hearing this, he was stunned and then said with a smile, "Master, you don't have to worry about such a trivial matter. This time, more than a dozen forces acted together. I think that poor boy has already been killed." Qi Shaokong smiled and said, "Although it's a trivial matter, its nature is different. I just hope that they do it cleanly and don't spread it out, so as not to damage our reputation." The old servant echoed with a smile, "That's for sure." Qi Shaokong made a sound of acknowledgement and no longer paid attention to this matter. For a person of his status, killing a disciple from a poor family was indeed a small matter that was not worth mentioning. Suddenly, a flurry of footsteps came from outside the courtyard, which made Qi Shaokong frown and say, "Go and see what happened." The old servant beside him quickly took the order and left. Before long, he returned with a black invitation in his hand. The paper of this invitation was extremely special. It was like jade, but not jade. It was pitch black, like the purest night, and its surface was branded with a delicate and cold obsidian flower pattern. "Master, someone just sent this invitation to you." The old servant handed the invitation to Qi Shaokong with a puzzled look. Qi Shaokong inadvertently glanced at the invitation. When he saw the obsidian flower pattern on the invitation, his pupils suddenly shrank, and his whole body stiffened imperceptibly. He snatched the invitation and opened it. There was a line of words written on it. "Tonight's matter is over." It was a simple sentence without any threat or deterrent force. However, Qi Shaokong's eyes were fixed on this sentence, and his originally dignified and graceful face was now extremely dignified. This sentence was indeed very simple, but when it appeared on the black post branded with the obsidian flower, it carried with it an unquestionable sense of command. This taste reminded Qi Shaokong of many rumors. His heart trembled at this moment, and his expression changed constantly. Obsidian invitation. Qi Shaokong never thought that he would receive such an invitation one day, which made it difficult for him to calm down. The old servant that stood at the side was slightly surprised and bewildered. He acutely noticed that Qi Shaokong's expression was slightly off, and he couldn't help but be anxious in his heart. Could it be that this mysterious black, colored invitation card has a terrifying origin? It should be known that his master was second to none in Mist City and could be said to have great power. But at this moment, he seemed to be extremely afraid of such an invitation, which was incredible. After a long time, Qi Shaokong took a deep breath, slowly put down the obsidian invitation in his hand, and murmured, "Who said that the boy came from a poor family? Who on earth said that?" In the end, there was a touch of angry roar in his voice, and Qi Shaokong's face had become extremely ugly. The old servant next to him was so scared that he trembled all over and almost crawled on the ground. "Father, tonight's action has failed." At this time, a figure suddenly pushed open the courtyard gate and rushed in. There was a sense of exasperation in his voice. This man was Qi Yunxiao. He came to the pavilion in 2 or 3 steps and said anxiously, "Father, Lin Sun is still alive. We must take action. We can't let a poor bastard like him live. Otherwise, the face of Azure Light Pavilion will be lost in the future." Qi Shaokong suddenly raised his head, and his eyes were frighteningly bright like a beast. He couldn't help but roar in his heart. He suddenly stood up and slapped Qi Yunxiao in the face, causing blood to spurt from his mouth and nose. Qi Yunxiao screamed and flew out. "Bastard, if that boy dies tonight, you won't be able to live either." Qi Shaokong roared. Qi Yunxiao was completely stunned. He looked at his father in disbelief and didn't know why he was so angry. The old servant quickly comforted him. "Master," Child Yunxiao was also kept in the dark. If he had known the seriousness of the situation, he would not have been so reckless. Qi Shaokong also knew that it was not the right time for him to lose his temper. He took a few deep breaths and restrained his anger. He gritted his teeth and said, "From now on, you are not allowed to find trouble with Lin Sun. If I know who dares to do so, I will be the first to kill him." After that, he turned around and left. The sudden appearance of Obsidian's invitation made Qi Shaokong realize that their so-called action of killing the chicken to warn the monkey had completely kicked an iron plate. Qi Yunxiao covered his red and swollen face, feeling wronged and confused. Although he didn't know the reason, he had roughly guessed that the change of his father's attitude had something to do with Lin Sun. Could it be that this fellow had some great background? For the first time, Qi Yunxiao found that he had never known Lin Sun in detail. Things like this happened in more than a dozen forces, such as Yuan family, Zheng family, and Zhou family in Mist City at the same time tonight. These forces all participated in the action against Lin Sun tonight. Without exception, they all received a mysterious obsidian invitation tonight. After that, every single one of the powers fell into a state of panic, terror, and unease. Many powers even held meetings overnight to discuss this matter. All of this was caused by Obsidian Invitation. There was only one sentence on the Obsidian Invitation. "Tonight's matter is over and must not be leaked." It seemed ordinary, but it was full of magical power, which made more than a dozen forces fall into an inexplicable panic. In the end, they came to a unanimous view that the young man named Lin Sun was not as simple as they thought. Behind him, there was a huge monster shrouded in the darkness of the Empire. Fear, panic, anxiety, uneasiness, all kinds of emotions spread among these forces. In the governor's mansion, Lu Wujuan fell into silence for the first time when he received the news. After a long time, he sighed and said, "These idiots should treat a young man who has a relationship with Obsidian Shrine as a poor man. They must have been kicked in the head by a donkey." In Miss College, Wei Lingjin was stunned for a while, and then said with a complicated expression, "Brother Dong Tu, it seems that it will be difficult for you to recruit him into the army again. Du Donta didn't take it seriously. Instead, he laughed and said, "As long as he is alive, it's enough. This time, we can make those forces suffer a big loss. It can be regarded as a lesson. At least they dare not be so unscrupulous when they target poor disciples in the future." Wei Lingjin said meaningfully, "But you should know that even if Lin Sun is really from a poor family, his identity has become different because of this relationship." Du Donta nodded and frowned, but it's not necessarily a good thing for him to be involved with that place. Wei Lingjin smiled and said, "This is not what we care about." Inwen clan. When Mingxiu couldn't believe her ears, Lin Sun was still alive under the siege of more than a dozen forces. "Ha ha ha! Mingxiu, you did a good job this time. We didn't do anything to him, which means we avoided a big trouble." Wen Changtian, the patriarch of Wen clan, laughed and praised Wen Mingxiu again and again. "Father, what happened?" Wen Mingxiu couldn't help asking. Wen Changtian casually told the news he just got, and finally sighed with emotion. "I didn't expect it. I really didn't expect it." At this time, Wen Mingxiu was completely stunned. Her heart was in turmoil, and she couldn't calm down. For the first time, she found that there was more than the bloodthirsty camp behind Lin Sun. If Lin Sun knew that the impact caused by killing so many enemies tonight was far less than that caused by a black post, how would he feel? Chapter 224. Tingyu Tower. With a snap, one of the zither strings broke, and the originally tinkling music came to an abrupt end. Tingyu sat up straight and thought for a moment. He sighed with emotion. "I didn't expect that the first failure of residual snow since he carried out the task was not to a famous big shot, but to a human gang realm teenager." The attendant outside the door fell into silence. He looked dignified and didn't know how to answer. In tonight's action, the assassin Grey Martin's ocean of chi was broken, and his cultivation was completely destroyed. The assassin Ghost Moon was forced to be in danger, and he didn't find a trace of the opponent until the end. In residual snow, he was also defeated. He was only an inch away from being pierced through the heart and dying suddenly. Without exception, Grey Martin, Ghost Moon, and Residual Snow were all defeated by the same person, and that person was just a human gang realm teenager who was about to take part in the province test. This outcome seemed to be so inconceivable and world-shocking. Up until now, this attendant was still slightly unable to believe all of this. Although the task failed, it's good that he didn't die. Tingyu stood up in a cyan robe, looking gentle and elegant. He stood in front of the window with his hands behind his back. Outside the window, the rain stopped suddenly, and the night sky was bright with stars. "Your Excellency," when Ghost Moon returned, he mentioned that there was a master who also participated in the assassination. Outside the door, the attendant suddenly remembered something and said quickly, "And that master let Ghost Moon bring back a message." "Oh," Tingyu asked with interest. "What did he say?" "He asked if you still remember Song Mountain Blood at dusk." Song Mountain Blood at dusk. In an instant, Tingyu was shocked, and a purgatory world with mountains of corpses and seas of blood appeared in his mind. In that world, the twilight was like blood covering Song Mountain. Thousands of strong men fell to the ground and turned into corpses and bones. Only a majestic figure, bathed in blood, stood proudly on the top of Song Mountain. "Is it him?" Tingyu's calm and indifferent face was in a trance, and his mood was fluctuating. After a long time, Tingyu suddenly turned around, and his eyes had completely restored calmness. He ordered, "From tonight on, this task will be cancelled permanently." Outside the door, the attendant stared blankly and was incomparably flabbergasted. Just because of the words Song Shan's blood at dusk, it actually caused his master's attitude to completely change? After all, Residual Snow, Ghost Moon, and Grey Martin suffered a crushing defeat tonight. If it couldn't be remedied, it would inevitably have a great impact on the reputation of Tingyu Tower. With Sir Tingyu's status and wisdom, he must be clear about this, but he made such a decision at this time, which made the attendant somewhat at a loss. "Go. You don't need to know the reason. You just need to know that Lin Sun is not someone we can touch." Tingyu took a deep breath and let out a sigh. In the palace, Yao Susu and Lin Fei waited anxiously like a pair of ants on a hot pan. So much time had passed, yet there was no news from them at all. This caused a wisp of worry to arise in their hearts. It's just to kill Lin Sun and spend 10,000 imperial gold coins to hire the top assassins of Rain-Tasting Tower. But there's still no news until now. Lin Fei couldn't help saying unhappily, "Brother Fei, wait a little longer. Even if there are some accidents on the way, those powerful forces are doomed to not spare Lin Sun in the end. Don't forget that Lin Sun is from a poor family. If he is still alive tonight, how will the faces of more than a dozen powerful forces be?" Although Yao Susu was agitated, she still comforted Lin Fei in a gentle voice. Bang! At this time, the closed palace gate was pushed open, and Yao Tuahai strode in. Father-in-law. Yao Susu and Lin Fei were refreshed at the same time. But when they saw Yao Tuahai's expression, both of their hearts thumped and they felt cold all over. At this time, Yao Tuahai's face was livid and gloomy, and a cold light emerged in his eyes. He exuded an oppressive momentum like an angry ancient beast. "Father, this what's wrong?" Yao Susu couldn't help asking. "From today on, stay in Mist City honestly and don't care about anything about Lin Sun," Yao Tuahai said coldly, with a frightening power in his voice. Yao Susu and Lin Fei were both shocked. In an instant, they realized that there must be some upheaval in tonight's action. Otherwise, how could Yao Tuahai be so angry and unwilling with his current status? Yao Tuahai didn't come to vent his anger, but he was defeated by Shu Jin tonight and even suffered a certain injury. Of course, he wouldn't say such a shameful thing. He took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "That's it. Lin Fei, if you want to take revenge, you should do it step by step. Pass this year's province test first, and there will always be a chance to achieve your wish in the future." Lin Fei's heart trembled, and his face was extremely pale. "So, Lin Sun is not dead yet?" Yao Tuahai frowned and glanced at Lin Fei coldly. "Susu, keep an eye on him. Don't let him do anything stupid before the province test." Then he turned around and left. At this moment, Lin Fei's face was ashen and he was out of his wits. He had spent so much effort and paid so much, but now he didn't kill Lin Sun, the enemy who killed his father. This was like a heavy hammer, smashing Lin Fei's whole body. Seeing this, Yao Susu was both distressed and angry, and at the same time, she was a little confused. Lin Sun was a young man from Feiyun village, a poor bastard who only had human gang realm cultivation. How could he be the opponent of more than 10 powerful forces? How did he survive from the assassins of Tingyu Tower? What frightened Yao Susu most was that she had vaguely guessed that her father seemed to have taken action tonight. But in the end, it seemed that he didn't change the situation and let Lin Sun survive. This was too horrible. Her father was a great practitioner of Tao Insight Realm, famous in the whole southwestern province, enough to be on par with Governor Lu Wujuan. Even he didn't succeed. How did Lin Sun do it? The more she thought about it, the more frightened Yao Susu was. Unconsciously, she was covered with a layer of cold sweat. The long night was torn apart by a ray of dawn, dispelling the darkness that shrouded the world and heralding the arrival of the next day. It was a turbulent and dangerous night, bloody and cruel. But on the second day, Mist City was surprisingly calm. People were busy as usual, and the streets were still bustling. It seemed that nothing was different from before. But this calmness made all the practitioners who had been paying attention to all this since last night feel shocked. Until now, they hadn't received any news. What on earth happened this night? Had Lin Sun, who came from a poor family, been killed? What about the dozens of powerful forces? Why did they keep their mouths shut about this matter and not reveal any information? No one knew. This kind of calm atmosphere was even a little weird. Many practitioners distributed in Mist City, even the well-informed ones, knew nothing about it. But the more it was like this, the more frightening it was. Something drastic must have happened last night, which led to such a calm scene. The power that could block all the news and suppress everything about last night without being known to the world was too horrible. Many practitioners realized that no matter what happened last night, now that it was suppressed by an invisible force. It might not be known in the future. In a small courtyard in the southwest area of Mist City, Chao Yunxio's face was extremely bad. As the head of Qingyun society, he had planned to publicize what happened last night and make the city full of wind and rain, so that those powerful forces would be completely in a passive position. But who would have thought that everything about what happened last night was completely blocked up until now, and no news came out at all? This caused Chao Yunxio to feel extremely unwilling in his heart. At the same time, he felt extremely terrified in his heart. This invisible force that was able to seal off all the information was too terrifying. "Brother Chao, what should we do now?" Next to him, a group of members of Qingyun society looked at each other, all at a loss. "That's the only way." Chao Yunxio sighed after a long silence. "For now, we can only bear it for the time being and wait for a chance to take action later." After a pause, his eyes became firm again, and he said sonorously, "But remember, in today's empire, the powerful forces and the poor people at the bottom are like fire and water. This kind of contradiction will break out sooner or later. At that time, it will be the chance for our Qingyun society to rise." All the members of Qingyun society were infected by his words and became firm again. They were born in a poor family, so they were naturally unwilling to live in a poor family all their lives. "Brother Chao, do you think Lin Sun is dead or alive?" Suddenly, someone asked. Chao Yunxio frowned and said expressionlessly, "Whether he is dead or alive, since he has refused to join our Qingyun society earlier, he has nothing to do with us. Since we can't be like-minded friends, then." Before he finished, someone understood tacitly and said, "He is our enemy." Chao Yunxio smiled slightly, but shook his head and corrected, "He is not an enemy. But if he is in trouble in the future, don't expect our friends at the bottom to stand on his side again. I'd like to see how he can stand in the empire after offending the powerful forces and drawing a line with us at the bottom. Of course, the premise is that he is still alive now." Lin Sun didn't know how long he had been sleeping. In a trance, a cold and emotionless voice seemed to ring in his mind again. "Practitioner, the next time the heaven accessing place opens, it will be 1 year later. The third test of Green Cloud Path is called 100 Battles. There are only 3 chances to pass the test. If you fail in the end, the heaven accessing place will fall into a sealed state until a chance opens it again after 1,000 years. When the voice fell, Lin suddenly felt a shock all over his body. He suddenly woke up from a deep sleep and opened his eyes. P.S. Happy Dragon Boat Festival. Some children said that the Dragon Boat Festival was to commemorate Chu Yuan, so they couldn't wish him happiness. But Goldfish here had to popularize a little knowledge. The Dragon Boat Festival had existed long before Chu Yuan's death. It was an ancient festival of sacrifice. Chapter 225. The familiar layout of the room came into Lin Sun's eyes, which made him feel inexplicably calm and relaxed. "The last time I passed the second test of Green Cloud Path was just before the quarterly assessment in the Bloodthirsty camp. Now there are only less than 3 months left before the third test of Green Cloud Path." Thinking of the cold voice in his dream, Lin Sun couldn't help but silently calculate the time. The heaven accessing place was a supreme opportunity. After passing the first test of Green Cloud Path, he got meditating magic, and even the injuries left on the 4 acupoints of his heart vessel were healed. After passing the second test of Green Cloud Path, not only did his physical cultivation reach the level of metallographic jade, but he also got the first part of Nature Insight and Spirit Devour Scripture and Tianyuan Saberplay. One of them was a cultivation method that could explore the dark and gloomy of secluded seclusion, understand all mysteries, swallow the image of creation, and refine 10 directions to the wilderness. It was so wonderful that it could support Lin Sun's cultivation to the Tao Insight realm. Although there were only 3 movements of Tianyuan Saberplay, reaching for the stars, gathering the moon, and burning the sun, the power of each movement was unparalleled. Even with Lin Sun's current comprehension, he could only display 1 movement of reaching for the stars. Anyway, through the first 2 tests, Lin Sun thoroughly realized the value of the heaven-accessing place. It was not an exaggeration to call it a supreme opportunity. Under such circumstances, Lin Sun was also full of expectations for the third test. Before long, Lin Sun began to check his body and found that most of his strength had been restored, and the wound on his abdomen had also healed. However, it would take time for him to recover completely. Chirp, chirp, in the courtyard, there came Chirp's crisp and cheerful voice and Shu Jin's hearty laughter. Lin Sun got up and pushed the door into the courtyard. He saw Shu Jin holding a wine jar and drinking heartily. Opposite him, Chirp was lying in front of a wine bowl and also drinking. From time to time, it would chirp happily, and its ball-like body was swaying and jumping as if it was drunk. This scene caused Shu Jin to roar with laughter, and he ceaselessly filled Chiochio's bowl with wine as if he was drinking with a bosom friend. Lin Sun's face darkened. He stepped forward and grabbed the soft and round body of Chirp's, saying grumpily, "Why do you have to learn to drink wine? I have no money to buy you wine in the future." Whether Chirp's understood or not, it jumped into Lin Sun's arms and rubbed his chest intimately, making a cheerful chirping sound with a heartless look. He sat opposite Shu Jin and asked, "How long have I slept?" Shu Jin casually said, 3 days is not a long time." Lin's heart tightened. Did anything else happen in the past 3 days? Shu Jin smiled and said disapprovingly, "Don't worry. At least before the province test is over, those guys won't dare to do anything to you." His words were casual, but they were filled with absolute confidence. This surprised Lin Sun. He knew clearly that Shu Jin might have done something for him when he was asleep to resolve the consequences of the battle that night. "Thanks a lot." Lin Sun raised his bowl, toasted Shu Jin, and drank it up. Shu Jin smiled and pointed to Chirps in Lin Sun's arms, asking curiously, "Where did you get this little thing?" Lin Sun casually said, "I picked it up for nothing. I don't know what kind of monster this little guy is, so I just keep it as a pet." Shu Jin laughed. "Pet? You are so blind. Although I can't see the origin of this little guy, I'm sure that it has a lot of extremely special powers." Lin Sun was shocked and asked quickly, "What do you mean?" In the bloodthirsty camp, even Shu Sanchi and old Mo couldn't figure out the origin of Chirps, but Shu Jin seemed to have found something in Chirps. Shu Jin was surprised. "This little guy has been following you all the time. Don't you know the power it has?" Lin Sun was stunned and then frowned in thought. "I only know that Chirps can breathe fire from its mouth, which is extremely overbearing. It can penetrate the ground and burn rocks with one blow, which is comparable to a full blow on the 9th level of Martial Realm. Oh, by the way, this happened when Chirps was just born." Shu Jin asked with interest, "What about now?" Lin Sun shrugged helplessly. "When I participated in the war zone training in the bloodthirsty camp, I accidentally got a mysterious black animal tooth from an assassin from Water Barbarian Branch, but it was accidentally eaten by Chirps. After that, Chirps fell into a deep sleep. It didn't wake up until the night 3 days ago." Shu Jin said thoughtfully, "That is to say, you still don't know what happened to this little guy after it woke up from a deep sleep?" Lin Sun was stunned. After thinking for a while, he said, "That's right." Shu Jin turned his hand and took out a shining silver item, like a silver gem, shining in the sun. "What's this?" Lin Sun's eyes were attracted by it. He felt a kind of compelling spiritual chi from this item. At first glance, he knew it was not an ordinary spiritual material. "This was spat out by this little guy after I brought you back 3 days ago." Shu Jin's eyes flashed with a strange light. "According to my observation, this is a piece of silver snow spiritual iron, which is quite precious. What's rare is that its quality is extremely pure. Such a palm-sized piece can be sold at the price of 500 imperial silver coins in the market." Lin Sun narrowed his eyes and suddenly remembered that in the confrontation with residual snow that night, at the most dangerous moment, it was Chirps that swallowed the spiritual arrow that was about to break through and saved him from danger. Could this piece of silver snow spiritual iron in front of him have something to do with the spiritual arrow swallowed by Chirps? Lin Sun told this idea to Shu Jin. Shu Jin's eyes brightened, and he said, "Sure enough, It's exactly the same as my previous speculation. As he said, he took out a spiritual sword on the lower grade of human rank and handed it to Chirps. Chirps looked at Lin Sun with its dark and pure eyes, which made Lin Sun's heart move, and he nodded to Chirps. Xiuqiu opened its mouth and sucked. With a slurp, the 2-foot-long spirit sword was swallowed into its stomach. Lin Sun and Shu Jin stared at Chirps with rapt attention. Xiuqiu's originally round and soft little body was suddenly stretched out like a piece of dough. This seemed to make Xiuqiu very uncomfortable. Suddenly, strands of dazzling golden flames that were like the scorching sun surged out of its body and burned fiercely. The blazing high temperature incinerated the air and distorted the void. Lin Sun and Shu Jin's eyelids twitched at the terrible flame. This kind of flame was extremely overbearing and seemed to be able to melt everything. Lin Sun felt a burning pain on his skin from a few steps away, as if he was burning. Shu Jin seemed to have guessed something. With a terrible luster flashing in his eyes, he said, "It seems to be Smashing Star Golden Fire, one of the unusual fires in the world." Smashing Star Golden Fire. Lin Sun was shocked. He had also heard of it. It was said that there were many unusual fires born in the world, such as Stonebell Jade Fire, Cold Soul Fire, Pure Flame, Samadhi True Fire, and so on. These unusual fires had their own magical functions. Some could assist practitioners in cultivation, and some could be collected for refining weapons and elixirs. According to the classification of power, the deviant flames that everyone knew of were divided into 4 major grades: Yellow Grade, Earth Grade, Heaven Grade, and Black Grade. Yellow was the last and the most common kind of unusual fire in the world. Black was the most rare, unusual fire in the world. Each unusual fire had the power to surpass the creation of heaven and earth, which could only be found by chance. And Smashing Star Golden Fire belonged to a kind of unusual fire of heaven. Perhaps it wasn't as rare as a mysterious rank heavenly flame, but it could also be said to be a rare item. In the current empire, only those upper echelon forces with a long history could possess such a heavenly flame. Now, Shu Jin said that what Chirps released was Smashing Star Golden Fire, which shocked Lin Sun. If that was the case, then Xiuqiu's origin was too unusual. Under the gaze of Lin Sun and Shu Jin, as the flame on Chirps became more and more blazing, its soft body gradually recovered. When its body became a round ball again, it opened its mouth and spat out a red spiritual light, which fell to the ground with a bang. Shu Jin stretched out his hand and picked it up. He held it in his hand and looked at it. Sure enough, the human rank lower grade spiritual sword has been smelted into a piece of red-striped fiery iron, and its quality is extremely pure without any impurities. There was a touch of amazement in his voice. Lin Sun frowned. It's not worthwhile for a good spiritual weapon to be smelted into a piece of spiritual material. Shu Jin said angrily, "You have eyes but fail to see. How can the value of a spiritual weapon of human rank compare with that of a top spiritual material of excellent quality and without impurities? Boy, you've picked up a treasure." Lin Sun raised his eyebrows and said, "Do you mean that the power of smelting Chirps seems to be very unusual?" Shu Jin shouted, "It's more than unusual. It's simply against the natural order. An ordinary spirit artifact can be smelted, all of its impurities removed, and finally become the purest spirit material. Merely in terms of value, it's a level higher than an ordinary spirit artifact." Pausing for a moment, he continued, "This is only a comparison in terms of value. Do you know that if a pure spirit material like this is used to reforge a spirit artifact, the power of the spirit artifact forged will also be significantly improved?" There was a touch of excitement in his voice. "The most important thing is, do you know why the number of armors with spiritual tattoos in the world is so small? One of the most important reasons is that the best and purest spiritual materials are needed to refine the armors with spiritual tattoos." Speaking of this, Shu Jin's voice stopped abruptly, and he looked at Lin Sun with a strange look. "Boy, you are a young spiritual tattooist. Don't you know this truth?" Lin Sun still frowned and didn't understand why Shu Jin was so excited. He said, "As far as I know, Any spiritual tattooist who has some attainments in spiritual tattoos can smelt spiritual materials. It's not an incredible thing. Shoot, Jeans said flatly. You're right, but have you ever seen a strange beast like this little guy? It can do this only by devouring? There was no doubt that Chirps, who mastered Smashing Star Golden Fire, was a born smelting master. Speaking of this, he stared at Chirps lying in Lin Sun's arms and said word by word, the most important thing is that this is just one of its talents. Chapter 226. Whoosh. Just as Lin Sun was surprised, Shu Jin suddenly stretched out his hand and grabbed at Chirps. His palms and fingers were like an inescapable net, which seemed to imprison Chirps. Chiochio's round body turned into a wisp of fire that was as thin as a strand of hair. It flickered and disappeared. The next moment, it appeared more than 100 feet away. Lin Sun narrowed his eyes. What a fast speed! Did you see that? This is its second talent, shape-shifting. Shu Jin withdrew his palm, and the color in his eyes became more and more intense, as if he had found a rare treasure. As far as I know, it is extremely rare for spiritual beasts in this world to have the means of shape-shifting like Chirps. The so-called shape-shifting meant that the body could change into another form. For example, Chirps turned into a wisp of fire just now, which was something that other spiritual beasts could not do. And you should also notice that after Chirps transformed into a wisp of fire, it flashed like lightning. It's incredibly fast, which is very rare. Shu Jin praised again and again. He had seen some spiritual beasts with strange talents since he started his cultivation. He even saw the purple-horned nightmare beast in the royal family of the empire. But he had never seen a spiritual beast like Chirps, which not only had Smashing Star Golden Fire in its body, but also had a rare talent of shape-shifting like a natural smelting master. Coupled with the fact that he was unable to determine Chirps' origins, it gave it a mysterious look in Shu Jin's eyes. Lin Sun held Chirps in his hand and kept rubbing the soft and round body of the little guy. Looking at the cute and cheerful look of the little guy, he couldn't help but wonder if Chirps was really a rare spiritual beast. After playing for a long time, Chirps seemed to be hungry and kept sucking Lin's fingers. Lin Sun suddenly realized a serious problem. Chirps was a strange beast that ate spiritual crystals as food. When it was just born, it needed to swallow a piece of high-level spiritual crystal every 3 days. If young man didn't raise it, Lin couldn't raise it at all. But now, young man was not around, so he could only rely on himself to raise Chirps. At the thought of preparing some high-level spiritual crystals to feed Chirps, Lin couldn't help but gasp. It was a huge expense. The most important thing was that Lin didn't have any high-level spiritual crystals on him at present. He tried to take out some elixirs to feed Chirps, but Chirps shook its head in disgust. Old Jean, do you have any high-level spiritual crystals? Lin Sun had to ask for help. Shu Jin asked in surprise, does this little guy replenish his strength by swallowing advanced spiritual crystals? Lin Sun nodded heavily. Shu Jin couldn't help but laugh out loud. Ah, that's right. This little guy has such a miraculous skill, so it's definitely different from other spirit beasts. If that's the case, this little guy's stomach is a money-squandering den. If you don't have money, you really can't afford to raise it. There was a hint of schadenfreude in his voice. Lin glared at old Jean and suddenly said to Chirps, go, ask this guy for food. Chiochio seemed to understand. It turned around and looked at old Jean with a pair of pitiful black eyes, chirping nonstop. Shu Jin sneered and took out a dazzling spirit crystal with a misty cyan light. He said, this is a top-notch spirit crystal, which contains 10 times the power of a high-level spirit crystal. Only practitioners in the Tao Insight realm are able to absorb and refine the power in it. If you can eat it, without waiting for him to finish speaking, Chiochio had already rushed over and swallowed the green second spirit crystal in one gulp, letting out a cry of joy. Immediately, flames flowed around Chiochio's body, as if it was breathing, producing a terrifying, scorching power. Finally, it seemed to be full. With a burp, it turned into a line of fire and disappeared in Lin's right palm. Obviously, it was asleep again. Shu Jin was stunned. After a while, he swallowed hard and said, It can really refine Green Bee's spiritual crystal. This appetite can really eat too much. Lin Sun couldn't help laughing. Old Jean, in this case, you will be in charge of Chirp's food in the future. Shu Jin's cheeks twitched fiercely. He gritted his teeth and said, "Do you know how much a Green Bee spiritual crystal can be sold on the market?" He stretched out a finger. 100 gold coins. That's 20 times the price of a high-level spiritual crystal. If it wants to eat a piece every day, I won't be able to feed it even if I go bankrupt. Lin Sun was frightened, but he still said with a smile, "It's okay. I believe you can do it." Shu Jin sneered. "Boy, are you blackmailing me?" Lin Sun said helplessly, "Old Jean, you just said that Chirps is a magical and rare spiritual beast. You won't let it starve to death, will you?" Shu Jin snorted. "Anyway, it's not my spiritual beast. Why should it starve to death?" Speaking of this, he rolled his eyes and suddenly showed a malicious smile. "However, if you promise me one thing, I may guarantee that this little guy won't starve to death." Lin Sun said vigilantly, "Tell me what it is first. I will definitely help you if I can do it." Shu Jin said, "Don't be nervous. You may not be able to do it now, but you will definitely be able to do it in the future." Lin Sun said, "Oh, what is it?" Shu Jin no longer concealed his intention. He stared at Lin Sun and said bluntly, "Help me make a set of spiritual tattoo armor." Spiritual tattoo armor. Lin Sun was shocked. It was not so easy to refine a set of spiritual tattoo armor. It often required several spiritual tattoo masters to refine a set of spiritual tattoo armor. There was a chance to refine it, but it didn't mean that it could be done. Collecting the required spiritual materials, spiritual inks, and spiritual tattoo patterns was an unimaginably large and complicated project. Moreover, the key to the unimaginable power of the armory with spiritual tattoos was that it also required luck to refine a set of armory with spiritual tattoos. At least as far as Lin Sun knew, the number of spiritual tattoo armor in today's empire, even in the upper-class forces with a very long history, could be counted on one's fingers. The reason was that it was too difficult to refine a set of spiritual tattoo armor. Ordinary forces couldn't afford it in terms of manpower, material resources, and financial resources. Nowadays, many of the known spiritual tattoo armors in the world have been inherited for hundreds or even thousands of years. There were some newly refined spiritual tattoo armors, but they were extremely rare. For example, in the Academy of Spiritual Implements of the Empire, there gathered a group of top spiritual tattooists in the Empire, including many masters of spiritual tattoos and grandmasters of spiritual tattoos. However, it still took them several months to refine a set of armors with spiritual tattoos. Seeming to know that his request was a little harsh, Shu Jin added, "Of course, I will provide all the spiritual materials for refining the spiritual tattoo armor. You only need to help me refine it. It doesn't matter even if you fail." Lin Sun smiled bitterly. "Old Jean, I am just a junior spiritual tattooist now. Why do you have so much confidence in me?" Shu Jin smiled like an old fox and said, "A junior spiritual tattooist? Haha, I have never seen a junior spiritual tattooist like you. Even Feng Qingyu, known as the genius girl in Green Deer School, is far less powerful than you." Lin Sun stared at him and said, "You flatter me." Shu Jin said angrily, "Boy, my conditions are good enough. It doesn't matter if you fail. How can there be such a good thing in the world? What's more, Chirps is a money-squandering den. Do you have the heart to see such a talented spiritual beast starve to death?" Lin Sun thought for a while and said, "Well, since you're not afraid, I have nothing to worry about. But I can tell you that I am not able to refine spiritual tattoo armor at present." Seeing Lin Sun agreed, Shu Jin immediately smiled and patted Lin Sun's shoulder affectionately. He said with a smile, "Don't worry. When you have this ability in the future, I will come to you as soon as possible." This matter was settled. Lin Sun solved the problem of feeding Chirps, and Shu Jin also got a promise from Lin Sun. Everyone was happy. There is still nearly half a year before the province test. "Do you have any plans next?" Shu Jin asked. "Make money and practice." Lin Sun's answer was very simple. Shu Jin nodded and said, With the fighting power you showed that night, it should not be a big problem to pass the province test. But don't underestimate the province test. There is no shortage of amazing and unparalleled geniuses in the world. Lin Sun agreed and said, I won't underestimate anyone. But if someone underestimates me, he is out of luck. Shu Jin laughed and said, then I will wait and see. Lin Sun also got up with a smile and walked out of the courtyard. I will go to the commune of spiritual tattooists to have a look. Chu Feng helped me a lot last time. Now that the danger has been lifted, I will go to thank him. Shu Jin waved his hand and said go. After Lin Sun left, Shu Jin was lost in thought. Finally, he sighed, shook his head, and took out a black post as pure as the night. Without any movement, the whole post suddenly burned and finally disappeared into nothingness. At the same time, in the Forbidden City, the capital of the empire, there stood a black building like an ancient castle on a lofty mountain adjacent to the lake. The building was magnificent and dark. It seemed that the light between heaven and earth dared not approach it, which made it fall into an eternal shadow. In the whole empire, only a small group of upper-class bigwigs knew that this building was called Castle of Night. The owner of the castle was as mysterious as the eternal night, like a taboo. Few people in the world knew her name, but the rumor about the Queen of Night had been circulating in the darkness of the empire. In front of the Castle of the Night, on a winding stone path in the mountains, a kind and gentle old man in a black court suit was walking up. When he arrived at the castle, the bronze gate filled with vicissitudes of life opened quietly. The old man tidied up his clothes and strode in. It was dark inside the castle, as if the eternal night shrouded here. It was quiet and solemn, revealing a kind of oppressive power. Miss, I have found some clues about the origin of Lin Sun. The old man stood quietly in the darkness and said softly, oh, in the darkness, there was an indifferent and ethereal voice. In an instant, a ray of light appeared in the whole castle, dispelling the darkness and reflecting a white bone throne. On the throne, there was an infinitely tall figure sitting upright, overlooking the world like the eternal night. The old man lowered his head slightly. Chapter 227. On the bone throne, the illusory figure was like a king in the dark night, invisible but omnipresent. Who is he? When she opened her mouth, her voice was full of a unique, low magnetic charm, as mysterious as the night. In a moment of carelessness, the illusory figure turned into a woman. Her hair was coiled up high, and it was held into a slanted bun with a black hollowed-out phoenix wooden hairpin. She looked very young, and her fair and tender skin was fair and delicate. Her pair of azure eyes contained a type of indifference that was unique to those in a superior position. She was wearing a well-fitting black gown that perfectly outlined her slender figure. On her slender and fair right pinky finger, there was a black gemstone ring. That ring was like an open pupil, pitch black like the eternal night. The Queen of the Dark Night. She was a classical, elegant, noble, and beautiful woman, exuding a kind of quiet and empty dark temperament. The kind of darkness seemed to be able to devour souls and make everything sink. But in the eyes of the old man, all he saw was a graceful figure that seemed to come from the darkness. Apart from that, there was nothing. He is not from Feiyun village. The old man lowered his head slightly and said in a gentle and calm voice, I have personally investigated. 3 months before he entered Feiyun village, the mine prison abandoned by the founding emperor was completely destroyed overnight, leaving no trace. On the bone throne, the Queen of the Dark Night fell into silence. After a long time, she said, You mean he's that child? The old man shook his head and continued, I have searched along the original place where the mine prison was. But what puzzled me was that it would take at least 1 year for Lin Sun to enter Feiyun village with his cultivation at the 2nd level of martial realm. There is a big conflict with the time of 3 months. The queen's voice was cold and low. There is no conflict. With Lu Boya's means, he can arrange a shifting spiritual formation and send this child out of the mine prison in an instant. The old man narrowed his eyes and seemed to be a little surprised. Lu Boya? He didn't die? The Queen of the Dark Night nodded and said, There's no need to hide it from you now. The reason why I insisted on going to 3,000 Mountains a year ago was that I wanted to visit Lu Boya. It was just a name, but it seemed to cause the old man's emotions to be very unsettled. A trace of absent-mindedness appeared on his originally kind and gentle face. After a long time, the old man said with a complicated expression, "No wonder Shu Jin said that Lin Sun had unimaginable means of spiritual tattoos. I was wondering who he learned all this from." It turned out to be Lu Boya. His expression contained sudden understanding, emotion, and a wisp of surprise and bewilderment. He was unable to imagine how Lu Boya, who was clearly confirmed to have died long ago, would still be able to survive. Back then, Lu Boya's death had always been a mystery. Only I knew that no matter if it was the upper echelons of the empire or the bunch of old things on the observatory, they were all deceived by Lu Boya. The Queen of the Dark Night opened her mouth, and there was a trace of fluctuation in her voice, indicating that her heart was not calm. But now it seems that Lu Boya is really dead. It was as if Lu Boya's death made her feel a trace of unwillingness and regret in her heart. The old man also fell into silence. Even the Purple Abyss mine prison created by the founding emperor had been destroyed. How could Lu Boya survive? In this way, Lu Boya didn't die all those years ago, and he hid in the Violet Abyss mine prison with the child that should have died long ago. But I'm afraid Lu Boya didn't expect that a calamity would suddenly descend upon him and destroy his life in the end. The old man sighed, with a touch of complex emotion in his eyes. He seemed to be recalling the past. The voice of the Queen of the Dark Night had returned to its former indifference and low. What I'm curious about now is whether the murderer who destroyed the Purple Abyss mine prison wanted to kill Lu Boya or Lin Sun. The old man's eyes suddenly narrowed. This question was very important. If the murderer wanted to kill Lu Boya, it proved that the murderer didn't know Lin Sun's identity. If it was just to kill Lin Sun, it proved that they didn't know that Lu Boya, who had been proved to be dead at that time, was also a mysterious figure. Of course, there was another possibility that the murderer wanted to kill Lu Boya and Lin Sun at the same time. Only Lu Boya knew what happened at that time. Otherwise, Lin Sun couldn't have survived at all. Unfortunately, with his death, this mystery has been difficult to solve. The Queen let out a sigh. The old man thought for a moment and said, "Miss, let's not talk about the past. Now that we know Lin Sun's origin, should we—" Before he finished, he was interrupted by the Queen. "Suppress this matter." The old man was stunned. "Suppress?" The Queen said indifferently. "Only Lu Boya knows the reason of that incident. Since Lu Boya doesn't want to tell him the reason, we don't have to go beyond our authority. Unless one day he can have enough power to change my mind, maybe he is qualified to know all this." The old man nodded. At this time, there was a slight sound of footsteps in the depths of the castle. That's it. On the white bone throne, the figure of the Queen of the Dark Night suddenly became illusory and gradually disappeared into nothingness. The old man bowed slightly, and his etiquette was impeccable. Then he turned around and left the castle completely shrouded in darkness. Just as they all disappeared, a little girl wearing a black cloak with her face covered under the brim of the hat came. The eternal darkness in the ancient castle seemed to be unable to block her line of sight. Very soon, she arrived in front of the empty white bone throne. "It's useless to hide from me. Your conversation can be separated from the world, but it can't be hidden from the darkness. And I come from the darkness." The little girl stood there quietly and murmured in her heart, "Sister Xie, Sister Xie." Suddenly, a clear voice sounded. With the voice, a bright purple light cut through the darkness and hurried from a distance. Looking carefully, it was a boy of 12 or 13 years old. His clothes were whiter than snow, with red lips and white teeth. His eyes were as bright as stars. In particular, there was a natural purple lotus mark between his eyebrows, which made him stand out from the crowd. Although he was just a teenager, when he moved, he was surrounded by purple holy light with a kind of extraordinary and transcendent momentum. Seeing Xie standing in the darkness, the teenager's eyes became brighter and brighter. He smiled and said, "Sister Xie, why do you come here? Aren't you afraid of being scolded by Lord Dark Knight? He looked very affectionate. Shi ignored him and turned away. Seeing this, the teenager was not annoyed at all. He stepped forward and looked at Shi with bright eyes, saying, "Sister Shi, I have told my father yesterday that when my strength breaks through to the Tao Insight realm, my father will personally propose to Lord Dark Knight and betroth you to me." Shi was silent all the way, as if she simply ignored the existence of the teenager. The teenager seemed to know Shi's character very well. He smiled disapprovingly and said, "To tell you the truth, with the talent property of Golden Sea Purple Lotus in my blood, I am absolutely confident that I can step into the Tao Insight realm at the age of 15. That is to say, in 3 years we can be together." At the end of his words, the teenager's eyes were full of longing and excitement. Shi finally stopped being silent. She suddenly stopped and said, "No one can control who I want to be with." As she said, she continued to move forward. Walking in the dark, her delicate figure seemed lonely and graceful. The teenager finally couldn't keep calm at this moment. He said with a trace of anger, "Sister Shi, who else in this world is worthy of you except me? Cheat Songfen? In the whole empire, when it comes to talent, origin, and cultivation, who can compare with me?" Shi ignored him and walked forward. Before long, she came to a bronze door in the deepest part of the castle. She raised her hand to open the door. But the teenager who called himself Chi Songfeng rushed over and stood in front of Shi. He took a deep breath and said firmly, "Sister Shi, I just want to tell you that you belong to me. No one in this world can take you away from me." Bang! Shi suddenly looked up. She didn't see any movement, but Chi Songfeng was shaken out uncontrollably as if he was hit hard. He fell more than 30 meters away. Immediately, Shi didn't look at him. She pushed the door and walked in. The bronze door closed quietly. Chi Songfeng squatted on the ground and stared at the closed door. A ruthless expression appeared on his handsome face. "Shi, I must get you. I must. Even if Lord Anya is here, he can't protect you for many years. At that time, whether you like it or not, you can only be my woman. In this world, only you are worthy of me, Chi Songfeng." The teenager murmured in his heart. He stood up and took a deep breath. The ruthlessness and anger between his eyebrows disappeared, and he returned to his outstanding appearance. He paced in the dark castle. His body was filled with wisps of purple holy light. At such a young age, he had a different momentum. "Lord Anya, I'm leaving. I will visit you with my father 3 years later." When he came to the door of the castle, Chi Songfeng bowed slightly to the darkness and pushed the door open. After Chi Songfeng left, the whole castle of the night fell into complete silence. Only the darkness was everywhere. If someone was here, he would be shocked. Who could imagine that a teenager who obviously didn't belong to the castle of the night could go in and out at will in the castle of the night, which was like a forbidden place in the whole empire? After a long time, a low magnetic voice suddenly sounded in the darkness of the castle. Chi family also began to test my attitude. It's getting more and more interesting. I'd like to see who among you will be the first one who can't sit still. On the stone path in the mountain beside the castle of the night, the old man watched Chi Songfeng leave. He frowned imperceptibly and couldn't help looking up at the castle of the night standing on the top of the mountain. What was Mist thinking? Chapter 228. Mist City. Walking in the bustling street, Lin Sun finally confirmed that the bloody killing 3 days ago seemed to have no influence on him after Shu Jin took action. This undoubtedly made Lin Sun feel relaxed. Not long after, when Lin Sun passed the spiritual curtain standing in the center of the city, he suddenly stopped. On the screen, a beautiful and solemn woman was saying quickly, "Today we have invited Senior Fong Yu, a senior spiritual tattooist who is famous in Mist City. Next, he will appraise a snowfall saber for us." As she said, a dazzling saber appeared in her hand. This saber is the treasure refined by the mysterious master, Sun himself. I think many of you are curious about why the snowfall saber refined by Master Sun is obviously more powerful than the snowfall saber. Next, Senior Fong Yu, Please explain it to us." With a flash of light, an old man in a brocade robe appeared in the screen with a dignified manner. There was an uproar nearby. "It's really Senior Fangyu. He is one of the top figures in Mist City. His attainments and spiritual tattoos are only a step away from the level of a master. The mysterious Master Sun has always been elusive. Everyone is curious about who he is. Now, even Senior Fangyu can't sit still and wants to appraise a spiritual weapon made by Master Sun. It's so exciting. Maybe through this appraisal, we can find out how powerful Master Sun is." "Damn it, don't shout. Listen to what Senior Fangyu has to say." Lin Sun was speechless. He glanced around and saw many practitioners standing there, looking up at the huge spiritual screen with curiosity and expectation on their faces. Lin Sun didn't expect that his reputation had become so resounding in Mist City that it was even spread on the spiritual transmission light curtain and invited a highly qualified senior spiritual tattooist to appraise his work. This was a rare honor for any spiritual tattooist. But for Lin Sun, it was a little strange. He even doubted whether the mysterious Master Sun that so many people were so curious about was himself. At this time, Fangyu, a senior spiritual tattooist, coughed and took the snowfall saber. He said seriously, "To be honest, I was also shocked by Master Sun's ingenious craftsmanship when I saw this saber for the first time. Indeed, Snowfall Saber is just a middle-grade spiritual weapon of human rank. Its rank is not high, and it is very common in the market. But such a saber, which has long been recognized by the market, and whose spiritual tattoo pattern has long been mature and stable, can be given new power by Master Sun in a unique way. This is undoubtedly a pioneering work." When he spoke up to hear, Fangyu couldn't help but be excited, and his expression carried a wisp of fervor. As he explained, the minds of many practitioners present were firmly attracted, and an unconcealable shock appeared in their hearts. Just listen to the words Grandmaster Fangyu used: "Wonderful workmanship. One of a kind." It was a groundbreaking feat. This made people doubt whether Fangyu was a senior spiritual tattooist who had been famous for a long time. Spiritual tattooists were the proudest existence. It was impossible for them to lower their heads to praise another spiritual tattooist. But now, as soon as Fangyu opened his mouth, he praised the mysterious Master Sun generously in a tone of admiration, which was too surprising. However, this also made many practitioners present more and more curious. Was Master Sun really as powerful as Fangyu said? Lin Sun felt uncomfortable when he heard these praises. If he really didn't know this senior spiritual tattooist, he would suspect that the old guy had been bought by someone to praise him on purpose. On the light screen, Fangyu explained the Snowfall Battle Saber with a fanatical look, spittle flying everywhere, and he used the professional terminology of spiritual runes. What was rare was that he could explain such boring knowledge of spiritual tattoos in a way that was easy to understand and interesting, which shocked all the practitioners present. Lin Sun couldn't stand it. When he refined a Snowfall Saber, it was never as exaggerated as Fangyu's description. He really just wanted to make money, not to break the convention. This was also normal. After a person made remarkable achievements, there would naturally be many voices waving the flag and shouting for him. But it was obvious that Fangyu, a senior spiritual tattooist, obviously regarded the so-called mysterious Master Sun as a first-class master in the world. So he praised and respected him so generously. If he knew that the mysterious Master Sun was only a teenager of 14 or 15 years old, how would he feel? Would he feel ashamed to say such words? "Child, since Master Sun is so powerful, if you can ask him to repair your ancient rhythm ocarina, maybe he can repair it." Suddenly, a clear voice came from the side, which attracted Lin Sun's attention. Ancient rhythm ocarina? Was there anyone in the world who owned such an ancient instrument that had long been extinct? Lin Sun was surprised. When he was a child, he had seen Master Lu occasionally take out a water droplet-shaped instrument about the size of a palm and play it. The sound was sometimes vast and deep, giving people a sense of vicissitudes of life, as if they were in the ancient times, feeling a kind of empty and boundless aura. Sometimes it was ethereal and lonely, like a lonely practitioner walking alone in the world, looking around blankly and unable to find the end of the road. Sometimes it was simple and pure, like high mountains and flowing rivers, quiet and natural, which made people feel relaxed. If they were bathed in the sound of nature, their hearts and souls would be comforted. Master Lu liked this instrument very much. He always felt that it was not a pity to have such a companion in this life, even if the road was endless. Later, Lin Sun knew that this instrument was called ancient rhythm ocarina, an instrument that had long been lost in the long river of time. There were 9 holes on it, and each hole would produce different temperament, which implied the number of 9 and 9 and the number of the Great Tao. Moreover, if an artistic cultivator with superb attainments in music were to play this instrument, it would even be able to produce unimaginable effects. However, the ancient rhythm ocarina was very special. To control, it required extremely harsh conditions. Not only did it require extremely powerful soul power, but it also required an innate talent in music. Master Lu once said that the sound of ancient rhythm ocarina could kill people and save people. It had endless magical effects, but there were few people in the world who could play it. The reason why ancient rhythm ocarina was almost extinct in the long river of time was that there were too few people who could control it. As time went by, this magical instrument gradually disappeared in the eyes of the world. So at this moment, when someone mentioned the name ancient rhythm ocarina, Lin Sun was so surprised and couldn't help looking up. Not far away, there stood a handsome child in a green robe, with red lips and white teeth. He held a jade fan in his hand and looked elegant. Beside the young master stood an obedient and quick-witted servant girl. Seeming to notice Lin Sun's gaze, the child in the green robe smiled at Lin Sun modestly and politely, with an indescribable, outstanding demeanor. The little maid squinted at Lin Sun, but she looked quite shrewd and said, "What are you looking at? Be careful of the needles in your eyes." Her voice was crisp and pleasant. The child in the green robe scolded, "Inger, don't be rude." The little maid pursed her lips and said, "Little child, I feel that this guy's eyes are strange. I know he has bad intentions at first glance." The child in the green robe couldn't help but feel embarrassed. He glared at the little maid and said, "If you talk nonsense again, I won't take you out next time." This time, the little maid suddenly lost her arrogance. She curled her lips and said nothing, but her eyes still glanced at Lin Sun from time to time, as if he was a big bad guy. "Child, I'm used to being capricious since childhood. Please forgive me if I offended you just now," said the child in the green robe apologetically. "It's all right." Lin Sun smiled brightly. How could he care about a little maid who talked without thinking? Unexpectedly, his smile fell into the little maid's eyes, making her look like an angry hedgehog. She said vigilantly, "Child, this guy's smile is really creepy. Even if he is not a bad guy, he is definitely not a good person." Lin Sun was stunned. The child in the green robe hit the maid's head hard with a jade fan and scolded, "If you talk more, I'll be really angry." With that, he cupped his hands to Lin Sun from a distance and planned to leave with the maid. Seeing this, Lin Sun couldn't help but say, "My friend, if you want to repair the ancient rhythm ocarina, maybe you can go to the master and have try." The child in the green robe suddenly stopped, and a strange light flashed in his eyes. After thinking for a moment, he said, "Thank you for your advice. Goodbye." With that, he left with the maid. Lin Sun shrugged. He really intended to help the child just now. After all, because of Master Lu, he was also very fond of ancient rhythm ocarina. It was rare to meet a person who owned this thing. If he could help the child, Lin Sun would be very happy. It was a pity that the child was obviously not interested in his suggestion. At this time, on the spiritual screen, Fong Yu's appraisal of Snowfall Saber was about to end. He said, "If possible, I hope to have a chance to visit Master Sun in person. If I can listen to Master Sun's teachings, I will have no regrets in this life." Hearing Fong Yu's praise, the practitioners in the field became more and more curious about the mysterious Master Sun. They had regarded Master Sun as a senior master in their hearts. Only Lin Sun shivered all over. This old guy was too fanatical. He only hoped that he would never meet him in this life, without any delay. Lin Sun left in a hurry and went to the commune of spiritual tattooists. Shortly after Lin Sun left, a woman in a bronze chariot parked in the distance couldn't help laughing out loud. She laughed so hard that her body trembled and her tears almost flowed out. Chapter 229. The woman in the bronze chariot wore a black dress. Her waterfall-like hair was coiled into a bun, revealing a snow-white gooseneck. Her face was white and delicate, like a blooming rose. This rare beauty was Mu Wansu, the leader of Keystone business in Donglin Town and known as the Black Rose. However, her identity was different now. As early as half a year ago, she was promoted as an exception and entrusted with important tasks. She became the leader of Keystone business in Mist City. One was a remote border city, and the other was the capital of Southwest Province. There was no doubt that Mu Wansu had the ability and means to reach such a high position. She laughed so hard at this time, as if she had heard the funniest joke in the world. She said, "Master Sun? Ha, that old guy boasted too much. If he knew that the so-called Master Sun in his heart was just a teenager, I don't know what expression he would make." "Miss Wansu, are you sure that this Master Sun is the little guy who made a storm in Donglin Town last year?" Outside the bronze chariot, Wang Lin asked in surprise. He was an appraiser of Keystone business in Donglin Town, and this time he came to Mist City with Mu Wansu. Who else could it be except him? "Wang Lin, you have seen the flaming spirit saber he sold when he first entered Donglin Town." Mu Wansu managed to stop laughing and said, "Although the snowfall saber is different from the flaming spirit saber, they have a common symbol, the brand of Sun! Wang Lin thought for a while and remembered the introduction from Feng Yu, a senior spiritual tattooist on the spiritual screen, just now. He immediately confirmed it. He couldn't help sighing with emotion. "I haven't seen Lin Sun for only a year, but he has become the famous Master Sun in Mist City. Life is really unpredictable. Who could imagine that Lin Sun had been in danger several times when he was living in the slums of Donglin Town?" Mu Wansu was also in a trance. When she first saw Lin Sun, it was in Feiyun village in the depths of 3,000 mountains. At that time, Lin Sun was just a rural boy at the second level of martial realm, which was not eye-catching at all. At that time, Shishuan valued Lin Sun very much, so Mu Wansu was extremely puzzled. Now, she finally vaguely understood. To this day, she could still clearly remember what the eldest young master, Shishuan, had once said, "In this world, there is a kind of person. As long as you give him a chance, he will explode with incomparably dazzling brilliance. Whether this person is a dragon or a snake, perhaps we will know in the future." Now compared with Lin's achievements in Mist City, even Mu Wansu had to admire Shishuan's shrewd and accurate judgment at the beginning. The current Lin Sun might not be very powerful, but for a boy from the countryside, he was no different from a carp leaping over the dragon gate. After that, the corners of Mu Wansu's rosy and plump lips curled up, and she grunted. That little rascal didn't even say a word when he left that day. If I see him in the future, I won't give him any face even if his identity has changed. Wang Lin smiled bitterly. When Lin was in Donglin Town, Mu Wansu didn't like Lin at all. It was not until later that Wang Lin personally came forward to ease the relationship between them. Who would have thought that Mu Wansu was still brooding about this, which really made Wang Lin speechless. But, Wang Lin, remember, Mist City doesn't know the identity of Master Sun until now. Lin Sun must have done this on purpose. For the sake of the eldest young master, we'd better pretend that we don't know this matter. Mu Wansu reminded him again. This made Wang Lin immediately understand that although Mu Wansu was fierce in words, she had no prejudice against Lin Sun for a long time. The bronze chariot quickly started and drove away. Mu Wansu collected her thoughts and muttered, "In 2 months, it will be the centennial celebration of Keystone business in Mist City. At the same time, this is also the first major event after I took office. Long ago, the eldest young master, Shishuan, personally helped me invite Lu Qingyan, an artistic practitioner, to come to the celebration. When I arrive at Keystone business, I want to meet this world-famous artistic practitioner as soon as possible." Wang Lin's eyes lit up and he asked quickly, Miss Wansu, has Lu Qingyan come in advance? Mu Wansu nodded and said thoughtfully, as an artistic practitioner, Lu Qingyan has such a great reputation in the empire. This woman is really amazing. Even the eldest young master told me to treat her as the most important guest. I'm curious whether her charm is really enough to make all living beings in the world fall head over heels for her, as the rumors say. On the bustling street, the cyan-robed man and the little maid Inger walked side by side. Inger, don't be so rude next time, the cyan-robed man exhorted. Inger stuck out her tongue and said with a smile, Oh, I'll listen to you. But the guy just now is so annoying. I think he doesn't even know what ancient rhythm ocarina is. How dare he give you advice? It's ridiculous. The cyan-robed man frowned and thought, Inger, do you think I should go to Master Sun and have a try? Inger pouted and said, Child, that guy's obviously bragging. Why do you believe him? What's more, even the spiritual tattoo masters of the Academy of Spiritual Implements can't repair the ancient rhythm ocarina in your hand. How can Master Sun be more powerful than them? The cyan-robed man hesitated, but seeing this, Inger couldn't help sighing. Well, I'll find a chance to accompany you to have a try. The cyan-robed man suddenly smiled. Well, as long as there's a glimmer of hope, I won't give up. Inger muttered, I hope I won't let you down again this time, but I feel that I will definitely be disappointed. The cyan-robed man glared at Inger and said, Well, let's go back quickly. Otherwise, if Grandma knows that we sneaked out, she won't spare us. Right at this moment, an aged voice suddenly sounded slowly. Young miss, this old one wouldn't dare to not forgive you. Suddenly, the cyan-robed man and Inger froze and looked at each other. At this moment, an old woman with a head full of silver hair came slowly with a crutch in her hand. She seemed to be slow, but in the blink of an eye, she stood in front of the cyan-robed man. She looked at the cyan-robed man helplessly and sighed, Miss, it's too dangerous for you to come out alone. If you have an accident. Before she finished, the cyan-robed man took the old woman's arm and said like a spoiled child, Well, Grandma, Inger won't dare to do it again. Don't be angry. A moment ago, he was still a handsome young man with graceful bearing. In the next moment, he seemed to have transformed into a young girl that was both happy and angry at the same time. The space between his brows was filled with a delicate and beautiful aura, causing the passers-by to be dumbstruck. Obviously, the cyan-robed man who called himself Inger was a woman disguised as a man. Humph, and you little maid, if you dare to do it again, I will punish you first. The old woman obviously doted on Inger and couldn't bear to scold her, but she glared at Inger next to her. Inger lowered her head and murmured, Grandma, I know I'm wrong. Go back quickly. If you don't go back, those childs will rebel, especially the young Sword King of the Xie family. If he runs wild in Mist City, I can't stop him. The old woman turned and walked away. Inger frowned, thinking of the group of childs gathered in her residence now. She couldn't help but have a headache. Those childs were all nobles in the upper class of the empire. Their identities were illustrious, and their temperaments were extremely unscrupulous. Even in the Forbidden City, few people dared to provoke them. Hearing that he was coming to Mist City this time, these childs also followed him. If they acted wildly in Mist City in order to find him, it might cause a disaster. Grandma, I don't want to go back. Inger looked at the old woman pitifully. Her clear eyes were like a pair of black gems, beautiful and innocent. No, the old woman refused flatly. Inger bit her lip and suddenly said, I can go back, but you have to promise me one thing. The old woman said, Miss, please say it. As long as I can do it, I will promise you. If I can't, please don't embarrass me. Inger giggled like a flower quietly blooming after the rain. Her smile was indescribably clean and beautiful. She said, It's a very simple thing, and it won't embarrass you. The old woman seemed to be relieved. Miss, what's the matter? Inger, on the side, rolled her eyes and interrupted. Grandma, Miss heard that Master Sun in Mist City can repair the ancient rhythm ocarina in your hand. So Miss wants to ask you to help her find this Master Sun. The old woman suddenly sneered. There is someone in Mist City who can repair ancient rhythm ocarina. Do you believe this kind of lie? Inger said quickly. Yes, I also feel that this Master Sun can't do it. But Miss has always been concerned about this matter. As a result, she was cheated by a bad guy just now. The old woman's eyes narrowed, and a terrible cold light flashed in her eyes. Who did you say cheated, miss? Shut up, Ing. Yenner glared at and said to the old woman, It's me who wants to find Master Sun and have a try. It has nothing to do with the young man. Please, I just want to have a try. I have no other request. The old woman seemed to be persuaded. She thought for a moment and said, Well, now, miss, you must go back with me. As for Master Sun, I will find a time to invite him for you. Yenner's eyes lit up, and she said, Grandma, you love Yenner the most. If you go in person, it will definitely be done. The old woman touched the girl's head dotingly and said, As long as Miss is happy. Lin Sun didn't know all this. At this time, he had arrived at the commune of spiritual tattooists. When he arrived at the second floor, he was immediately invited into a quiet room by Chu Feng, who was overjoyed. The first sentence he said was, You can settle more than 10 powerful forces overnight and make them not dare to spread the news. I am completely convinced this time. Chapter 230. Chu Feng's enthusiastic praise made Lin Sun feel a little overwhelmed. He said with a wry smile, Brother, I'm here to thank you for your help that night. Chu Feng smiled and said, It's just a piece of cake. Don't mention it. Lin Sun said seriously, It may be a piece of cake for you, but for me, it's like sending charcoal in the snow. On that night, 3 days ago, Chu Feng not only provided detailed information, but also supplies of elixirs, weapons, and equipment, as well as more than a dozen places to hide and rest. Without these help, Lin Sun was afraid that he could not hold on to the end alone. This was a big favor. Seeing this, Chu Feng couldn't help but stare at him and said, What's wrong, brother? Are you still so distant from me? In fact, he was quite happy that Lin Sun could appreciate his kindness, which made him very happy. More importantly, what happened that night had made Chu Feng thoroughly realize how extraordinary Lin Sun's background was, since he could make more than a dozen powerful forces return in frustration and even dare not to publicize it in the end. Now, Chu Feng was very satisfied that he could maintain a deep friendship with Lin Sun. Next, after chatting for a while, Lin Sun got up and left. He had promised Chu Feng that when his injury was completely recovered, he would continue to come to the commune of spiritual tattooists to accept tasks as usual. On the one hand, it was to make money. On the other hand, it was to help Chu Feng. After all, the reputation of Master Sun was like the sun at high noon in the whole Mist City. With Lin Sun here, it was enough to bring great benefits to the commune of spiritual tattooists. At the same time, Lin Sun planned to make a customized saber for himself. So he handed a list of spiritual materials to Chu Feng and asked Chu Feng to help him collect these spiritual materials. Chu Feng naturally agreed without hesitation. Through the battle 3 days ago, Lin Sun found that although the standard sabers on the market were powerful, they were not suitable for him after all, which made him unable to exert his fighting power at will. The real masters who were good at fighting would ask a spiritual tattooist to make a customized weapon for them. Lin Sun had not had time to do so because he was busy before. Now there was still a lot of time before the province test began, so Lin Sun could refine a suitable weapon for himself. It was not yet noon when Lin Sun left the commune of spiritual tattooists. Instead of going home in a hurry, he wandered slowly along the street. Mist City was prosperous and affluent, with novel and rare things that had never been seen before everywhere. For example, the post stations opened by beast tamers could be rented, and some pets could be sold. For example, the flower houses opened by spirit plants masters sold all kinds of beautiful spirit flowers and spirit herbs, which were very popular among girls. There were also some fruit and vegetable stores, spirit chef restaurants, arenas, slave markets, antique streets, and so on and so forth. There was a variety of them that dazzled one's eyes. All of these were rarely seen in a border city like Donglin Town. This was Ziyao Empire. The more prosperous a city was, the more one could feel the prosperity of the empire. as Lin Sun Feng of the cultivation of Lin of Sun, he Feng and Lin, he had of Li, Lin of Feng of Chun, and of Xing of the cultivation Lin Feng and Li. For example, the improvement of weapons and equipment was one of the most effective ways. In addition, the practice of martial arts could also improve one's combat effectiveness. Lin Sun's mastery of RFS had just broken through the level of initial glimpse and reached the level of nuance. It was still far from the level of accuracy, let alone mastery. If he could improve the reaching for the stars and reach the level of accuracy, the power he could exert would be even more terrifying. However, RFS consumed a lot of physical strength, so it could only be used as a trump card. Lin Sun put more attention on the practice of six-word saber play. Six-word saber play was an extremely mysterious and ruthless saber play. Even Drill Master Young Ku and Shu Sanchi attached great importance to it. Lin Sun had now reached the level of accuracy, and there was still a long way to mastery. Lin Sun planned to do his best to mastery of six-word saber play in the following time. In this way, at least in the province test, Lin Sun could ensure that he could pass the test without exposing RFS. Apart from that, in terms of soul cultivation, he had unintentionally planted a willow, and yet another 3 soul stars had appeared in Lin Sun's sea of consciousness after the battle 3 days ago. Now, there were a total of 21 soul stars hanging in the sky of his sea of consciousness. They were bright and resplendent, reflecting his soul, causing Lin Sun's soul perception to become increasingly powerful. The improvement of combat effectiveness is the most important thing. But before the province test, I have to prepare for the 3rd pass of Green Cloud Path in Heaven Accessing Place. Lin Sun thought silently. There were less than 3 months left before the 3rd pass of Green Cloud Path opened. This pass was called 100 Battles, and there were only 3 chances to pass it. Although Lin Sun didn't know how difficult and dangerous this pass was, he dared not to be careless. If he wanted to get the reward, he must be fully prepared. In Lin Sun's view, since the 3rd pass was called 100 Battles, it must be related to fighting. So no matter how he thought about it, the improvement of combat effectiveness was undoubtedly the most important. At this time, there was a sudden uproar in the distance, which made Lin Sun wake up from his contemplation. Looking up, he saw a strong man dragging a woman to a carriage beside him on the street dozens of meters away. The woman's hair was disheveled and her clothes were torn. She kept screaming and crying, "Help! Help! I don't know him. I really don't know him." The strong man looked indignant and said to the people around, "I'm so sorry. This is my wife. She has been cheating on me these days. Today, I finally caught her in the act, but she not only didn't admit her mistake, but also quarreled with me. She really pissed me off. I'll take her home right now." Seeing this, people nearby couldn't help showing a look of contempt. Someone even cursed aloud. "What a dissolute bitch. She didn't admit her mistake after cheating on me. She should be drowned in a pig cage. Bah, shameless woman. What are you shouting for? We won't save you even if you shout yourself hoarse. Brother, hurry up and take your wife away, in case she makes a fool of herself again." Everyone blamed the woman, but the strong man said gratefully, Thank you for your understanding. I'll take her away now." Saying this, he grabbed the woman's hair and dragged her to the carriage beside him. The woman's face was full of despair, fear, and helplessness. No matter how hard she struggled, she could only let out a pale scream. "Help! Help! I really don't know him." Just when she was about to be dragged into the carriage, someone suddenly shouted, "Wait!" The crowd who were watching the scene were all stunned. It seemed that they didn't expect that someone would stand up for this dissolute bitch. They looked up and saw a handsome young man had appeared out of nowhere and stood in front of the strong man. This young man was naturally Lin Sun. The strong man narrowed his eyes and shouted, "Little brother, this is my family's business. How can you, an outsider, intervene? Get out of the way." "Yes, young man, you are too nosy. Get out of the way and let the big brother take the bitch away." Someone helped and scolded Lin Sun. Others also spoke to let Lin Sun retreat. The strong man's eyes flashed with complacency. He raised his hand and pushed Lin Sun's shoulder. "Hurry up," and, before he finished his words, He let out a scream like a pig being butchered. His hand had been twisted by Lin's son, and the joints were dislocated. The pain made his body like a cooked prawn, bending over and kneeling on the ground. You were courting death?" The strong man shouted with resentment. The people next to him were also in an uproar. They never thought that this seemingly harmless young man would take action without saying a word. "Little brother, you are wrong. How can you intervene in other people's family affairs?" "Yes, it's too much. This is Mist City. There's so many eyes watching. Do you dare to hurt people?" "Umph. I think this brat has taken a fancy to this guy's wife. Not to mention, this woman is quite good-looking and has fair and tender skin. This brat is only 10 years old and is in the prime of his youth. He must have been charmed by this woman's beauty." The crowd was talking about it. In this busy street, they were not afraid that Lin's son would dare to kill them. Hearing the cracking sound of bones, Lin's son didn't say anything. He dislocated the strong man's limbs and let him kneel on the ground. His face was twisted in pain, his forehead was sweating, and his mouth kept screaming. In this way, it immediately attracted many onlookers and accusations. At this time, on the third floor of a restaurant on the side of the street, a soft voice suddenly sounded, "Why? Why is it Lin's son?" The speaker was a handsome young man. It was Chi-Yun Xiao, the young master of Azure Light Pavilion. He was drinking to drown his sorrows. Then, like Lin's son, he was attracted by the sudden disturbance on the street. At this time, he inadvertently glanced at Lin's son. When he saw the familiar figure of Lin's son, he was shocked and his face became gloomy. He remembered what happened on that night 3 days ago. He also remembered the loud slap that his father had given him in the face. This guy is getting more and more arrogant. In broad daylight, he even intervened in other people's family affairs. He really doesn't know what's good for him. Let's go and see what kind of joke he will make this time. Qian Xiao stood up and said, gnashing his teeth. The attendant next to him reminded, "Young master, the patriarch has given a death order that we are not allowed to provoke Lin's son again." Chi-Yun Xiao interrupted impatiently. "Who the hell wants to provoke him? We are going to watch the fun. Watch the fun, understand?" As he said, he turned around and walked down the restaurant. Chapter 231. On the busy street, there were more and more onlookers, and even many practitioners were attracted here. When they learned from others that Lin's son was standing up for a woman who didn't behave like a woman, many people showed anger. However, at this time, the rescued woman fainted on the ground because she was too emotional, and she couldn't defend Lin's son at all. But Lin's son didn't care. He just looked at the strong man who knelt on the ground and screamed loudly to win sympathy. His eyes were as sharp as a knife. "I'll give you a chance. Now tell me your name, origin, and the purpose of kidnapping this woman." Lin's son's voice was calm. The strong man shouted angrily, "Look, this boy not only bullies people, but also intends to slander me. What is kidnapping? Is it wrong for me to teach my wife a lesson?" Someone next to him couldn't help saying, "Young man, enough is enough. Don't make mistakes again. There's so many people here. Be careful not to provoke public anger." Crack! Lin's son didn't care at all. He lifted his tiptoe and directly stepped on the strong man's right palm. Suddenly, there was a sound of bones breaking and blood flowing. The burly man screamed in pain, but he was extremely unyielding and shouted, "Brat, kill me if you have the guts." Seeing this bloody scene, many people present were angry and felt that Lin's son had gone too far. "Brat, how dare you injure someone in broad daylight? Today, I'll teach you a lesson, you stubborn scoundrel." A practitioner stood out and spoke righteously, which immediately won a round of applause. Chi-Yun Xiao, who was hiding in the crowd, couldn't help but laugh when he saw this. Lin's son, you have such a day? I'd like to see how you will deal with this in public." Crack! Lin's son didn't even bother to pay attention to the practitioner. He lifted his tiptoe gently and crushed the other palm of the strong man. The man howled in pain, rolled his eyes, and fainted directly. "You're courting death." Seeing that Lin's son not only ignored him, but also continued to commit murder, the practitioner was immediately enraged. He stepped forward and slapped Lin's son with his palm. The palm wind was piercingly cold and produced a sonic boom. It was obvious that he had used his full strength. But Lin Sun stretched out his hand and grasped the opponent's wrist. Then he shook his hand violently. The practitioner's body suddenly trembled violently like a sieve. All the bones and joints of his body were removed. Like a dead fish, he fell to the ground with a plop and screamed. With one strike, he had suppressed a Xiuzha. Some ordinary people were terrified to the point of retreating repeatedly when they saw this, and they seemed as if they were avoiding a snake or scorpion. Never had they imagined that this young man would actually be so ruthless and formidable. On the other hand, some cultivators couldn't help but narrow their eyes when they saw this, and they were shocked in their hearts. The attack just now seemed simple and direct, but actually contained all sorts of profundities and killing intent. It was impossible to execute unless one's combat skills were extremely superb. Who was this young man? It didn't seem simple at all. The scene was shocked for a moment, and Qi Yunxiao, who was hiding in the crowd, secretly cursed. What a bunch of useless people. Just this little trick and you're scared? Qi Yunxiao also knew that most of the people present were ordinary people. Even those practitioners were just some low-level characters. The reason why they gathered here was just to watch the fun. It was impossible for them to deal with Lin Sun together. But knowing this, Qi Yunxiao was naturally very uncomfortable when he saw Lin Sun intimidating the scene with just a little trick. He came to see Lin Sun make a fool of himself, not to see how Lin Sun showed off his power. Crack! At this time, Lin Sun kicked the strong man with the tip of his foot. The strong man, who had fainted, suddenly woke up as if he had been electrocuted. When he saw Lin Sun in front of him, his face suddenly became angry and distorted. However, just as he was about to shout, he saw Lin Sun suddenly squatting down, and a sharp saber appeared in his palm. Lin Sun gently put it against the strong man's throat. The strong man's face changed completely, and a trace of fear emerged in his eyes. You? What are you going to do? Are you going to kill me? Saying this, he looked around as if asking for help, but found that although the onlookers couldn't bear it, no one came forward to help. Especially when he saw the screaming practitioner lying beside him. The strong man had a sign of collapse, and his face changed dramatically. I have given you a chance. If you don't tell the truth, it will not be as simple as cutting off your palms. Lin Sun said with a smile, but the blade in his hand suddenly flashed. With a puff, one of the strong man's ears was cut off, and blood burst out. The strong man screamed in pain, I'll tell you, I'll tell you. At this moment, in his eyes, the handsome young man in front of him was like a devil, which made him feel an unprecedented fear. My name is Hu Debiao, and I come from the south of the city. The strong man who called himself Hu Debiao endured the pain and said while gasping, Get to the point. Why do you want to rob this woman? Lin Sun said coldly. Hu Debiao cried and said in a trembling voice, This is a business. Selling a beautiful woman can earn a lot of money. Before he finished speaking, the onlookers were in an uproar, and their eyes on Hu Debiao changed from sympathy to anger, confusion, disdain, and contempt. Lin Sun said, So, she's not your wife. Hu Debiao completely lost his resistance and said dejectedly, No. The onlookers became angry, not because Hu Debiao was a human trafficker, but because they were deceived by a human trafficker just now, which made them feel a little embarrassed. Seeing this, Lin Sun got up and looked at the onlookers around him. He said with a smile, Everyone, this is the scum you want to protect. Are you satisfied now? Many people had embarrassed expressions on their faces. Someone muttered, Who knew he would be a human trafficker? If we had known this, we would have killed him together. Lin Sun looked at him coldly. Didn't you hear the woman's cry for help just now? The man still stubbornly retorted, In today's world, hearing a cry for help means waiting to help. Who the hell will be so stupid to help others when they see injustice? This kind of stupid thing can only happen in legends. Lin Sun replied with an unspeakable disgust and anger in his heart. Since when did chivalry become a stupid thing to do? He pointed to Hu Debiao on the ground and said, That's right. When human traffickers like this guy take away your daughters, wives, relatives, and friends in this way in the future, I'd like to see who will help you in this world. His words made many people in the field change their faces. Indeed, it was because of Lin Sun that the innocent woman was saved today. What should they do if the same thing happened to them in the future? Lin Sun didn't bother to say more. He looked at the practitioner lying on the ground next to Hu Debiao and said, "If I'm not mistaken, you were the one who secretly provoked others to be hostile to me just now, right? Are you on the same side?" His words made the practitioner and Hu Debiao's faces change suddenly. "Tell me, which gang are you from?" Lin Sun asked directly. When he was in Donglan Town, he had contacted many underground gangs, so he was very clear that human traffickers could not act alone. There must be a force behind the scenes manipulating them. As soon as Hu Debiao opened his mouth, he was shouted by the practitioner, "Don't say it." Seeing this, Lin Sun directly cut off the practitioner's neck. Blood burst out and sprinkled on Hu Debiao's face. He was so scared that he wet his pants. "Say it." Lin Sun looked at him. Hu Debiao dared not hesitate and said quickly, "We are all from the Black Python Gang." The Black Python Gang. Many people present changed their faces. It was the most notorious force in the underground of Mist City. It specialized in cheating and committing all kinds of crimes, especially abducting and selling women. Suddenly, many people were completely angry and clamored for Lin Sun to kill Hu Debiao. Seeing this, Lin Sun felt a little comfortable in his heart. At least these people had not completely lost their conscience. Qi Yunxiao, hiding in the crowd, was immediately disappointed. Knowing that there was nothing to see, he turned around and left with a gloomy face. But at this moment, Lin Sun had already stood in front of him, grabbed Qi Yunxiao's arm with a smile, and dragged him to the center of the crowd. Qi Yunxiao's face suddenly changed. He wanted to struggle, but how could he? At this time, Lin Sun said to the crowd, "Everyone, it's easy to kill Hu Debiao. But if we don't get rid of the Black Python Gang, this kind of thing will still happen every day." Now Qi Yunxiao, the young master of Azure Light Pavilion, has promised to help you get rid of the Black Python Gang. Qi Yunxiao was furious. When did he agree to this? Before he could speak, Lin Sun's voice sounded in his ears. "If you don't cooperate, don't blame me for blocking the door of your Azure Light Pavilion every day. As long as I see your people, I will beat them violently. I'd like to see what you can do to me." Qi Yunxiao trembled all over and was so angry that his eyes almost popped out. This guy actually coerced him like this. This was going too far. But unfortunately, he couldn't say anything. Because as Lin Sun said, no one in Azure Light Pavilion dared to hurt Lin Sun because of the obsidian invitation. The most disgusting thing was that if Lin Sun really took the initiative to bully the people of Azure Light Pavilion, should they fight back or not? Just as Qi Yunxiao was struggling in his heart, there was a burst of cheers in the field. They all praised First Child Qi of Azure Light Pavilion for being chivalrous and heroic. He was indeed a model of justice and righteousness in the world. Lin Sun also said with a smile, "You're right. With Azure Light Pavilion's help, even 10 Black Python gangs will be destroyed in a flash, let alone one. You must remember the great kindness of young Master Qi Yunxiao. It's really rare to see such a young hero who dares to fight against the evil forces." Suddenly, there was another burst of praise and cheers in the field. Qi Yunxiao was completely dumbfounded. Under the watchful eyes of the public, he was forced to this point. He had no choice but to agree. He was so regretful that he wanted to hit the wall. If he had known this, he wouldn't have come to see the fun. He should have run away as far as he could. But it was too late to regret. Lin Sun obviously had him under control. If he really dared not to agree, according to Lin Sun's ruthless character, he might really block the door of Azure Light Pavilion and make trouble. This kind of feeling of being used, but having to grit his teeth and bear made Qi Yunxiao really want to cry. He even wanted to commit suicide. Chapter 232. When Qi Yunxiao woke up from his stupor, he found that Lin Sun was no longer there, and many people nearby were looking at him eagerly. That gaze was like staring at a creditor who owed money, which made Qi Yunxiao uncomfortable. "Young master, what do you think we should do?" The attendant who had been following Qi Yunxiao asked in a low voice. "What else can we do? Take this guy away first." Qi Yunxiao pointed at Hu Debiao on the ground impatiently. Although Hu Debiao had left, Qi Yunxiao didn't have the courage to leave. The attendant seemed to be relieved and said with a smile, "That's good. It's better to deal with the Black Python gang than to be bullied by Lin Sun." Qi Yunxiao was stunned. Although he was uncomfortable, he had to admit that the Black Python gang was not as threatening as Lin Sun. Thinking of this, Qi Yunxiao waved his hand and said, "Take the unconscious woman with you. When she wakes up, send her home personally." The attendant nodded and planned to leave with Qi Yunxiao, carrying Hu Biao in one hand and the unconscious woman in the other. At this time, someone suddenly shouted, "Young Master Qi, will the Azure Light Pavilion take action against the Black Python gang?" Qi Yunxiao was displeased and said coldly, "If the Black Python gang can survive tonight, I will immediately commit suicide to apologize." With that, he swaggered off with his attendants. Behind him, there was a burst of cheers, all of which praised Qi Yunxiao for his courage and courage. He deserved to be the young master of Azure Light Pavilion. Listening to these praises, Qi Yunxiao's expression changed. Sometimes he gnashed his teeth, and sometimes he was indignant. But in the end, his expression became strange. After a long time, he asked in a low voice, "Do you think they are really praising me?" The attendant was stunned and immediately nodded. "Of course, young master. As soon as you took action, you helped them eradicate an evil force. How can they not be grateful?" Qi Yunxiao's expression eased a lot, and he said thoughtfully, "I didn't expect that it feels good to help others." The attendant was stunned. Qi Yunxiao seemed to have calmed down and said proudly, "However, since I promised them, tonight the Black Python gang." The attendant instantly understood and said with a murderous aura, "Young master, don't worry. Leave all these to me, and I guarantee that the mission will be completed." Qi Yunxiao smiled with satisfaction, as if he had forgotten the anger and grievance Lin Sun had brought him just now. But the attendant was very clear that compared with Lin Sun, his young master was still too young. He didn't lack intelligence or talent, but he lacked the experience of the world. However, this was normal. After all, the young master was only 14 or 15 years old. His temperament was at its most fickle. When Lin Sun returned home, he was surprised to find that Chu Feng had arrived one step earlier than him and sent all the spiritual materials he needed to refine his saber. Seeing Lin Sun, Chu Feng chatted with him for a while with a smile and then left. This fellow can be considered an interesting person. Shu Jin, who was drinking, commented. Lin Sun smiled and said, "There are many smart people in the world, but there is a lack of smart people like Chu Feng who are willing to make sacrifices." Shu Jin said, "The more you do this, the more you want. You should take it easy." Lin Sun nodded and turned to walk into the room. There were a lot of spiritual materials sent by Chu Feng. Some are used to cast sabers, and some are used to refine spiritual inks. There were more than 100 kinds of spiritual materials. In the past, when Lin Sun refined spiritual weapons, he bought finished spiritual inks and ordinary sabers. As long as he carved spiritual tattoos on them, he could refine a spiritual weapon. But this time was different from the past. Lin Sun was going to refine a saber for himself, so he needed to prepare the spiritual inks and materials needed for the saber himself. Most importantly, the saber Lin Sun was going to refine this time was different from all kinds of standard sabers sold on the market. In other words, he was planning to design a brand new battle spirit weapon for himself, according to his own wishes. This was an extremely challenging thing. There were many spiritual tattooists in the world who knew how to refine spiritual weapons, but few could use their own knowledge of spiritual tattoos to design a spiritual weapon alone. It was like creating a new kind of spiritual weapon, full of unknowns and no experience to follow. Everything had to be tried and explored by oneself, which also increased the risk of failure. Generally speaking, only those at the level of spiritual tattooist could have such ingenuity. Although it was the first time for Lin Sun to do this, he had seen many strange spiritual tattoos since he was a child with Master Lu, so he was not afraid to do this kind of thing. Sitting in his room, Lin Sun first classified all the spiritual materials one by one, and then took out a pen and paper to conceive and design. The composition of spiritual ink, the quality of the material of the saber, and the spiritual tattoos needed to be used. Any detail was listed out by Lin Sun one by one, and then he conceived and studied. This conception was based on his own cultivation and fighting style. Everything was to meet his own fighting needs. Russell, the atmosphere in the room was quiet. Lin Sun sat straight at the desk with a serious look, and the pen in his hand moved on the paper, making a rustling sound. Spiritual tattoos were a kind of magical power. If an ordinary weapon was inscribed with spiritual tattoos, it could be transformed into a spiritual weapon with incredible power, which could be called magical. Spiritual tattoos also involved every aspect of cultivation, such as refining elixirs, refining weapons, keeping animals, making puppets, and spiritual plants. In the whole empire, the changes brought by the power of spiritual tattoos could be seen everywhere, such as the spiritual screen, with the function of spreading messages, the spiritual tattoo shuttle, with the function of transporting and carrying people, and the battleship with the power of fighting and defense. It could be said that the existence of spiritual tattoos not only occupied an extremely important position in the cultivation system, but also began to affect all aspects of the whole world. The profession of spiritual tattooist naturally became a special existence. All the knowledge of spiritual tattoos Lin Sun had learned was inherited from Master Lu. Although he seemed to be just a junior spiritual tattooist, the knowledge of spiritual tattoos in his mind was far beyond that of a junior spiritual tattooist. Otherwise, it was impossible for him to help old Mo improve the structure of the spiritual furnace of a Ziying battleship in the bloodthirsty camp, nor could he refine the meteor's crossbow. Even the spiritual weapons he refined for others in the commune of spiritual tattooists were far more powerful than those on the market. Only Lin Sun knew very well that the knowledge of spiritual tattoos imparted by Master Lu might enable him to have an attainment far beyond his imagination. However, the key factor that allowed him to succeed time and time again when forging spirit artifacts, and to bestow spirit artifacts with an obvious superior power, was the heavenly door in his sea of consciousness. He had refined many spiritual weapons and was already familiar with the fact that the gate to heaven in his sea of consciousness would release a trace of imperceptible fluctuation at the moment when a spiritual weapon was successfully refined. It was precisely this trace of undetectable fluctuation that allowed him to not fail every time he refined a weapon. Furthermore, the power of the spiritual weapons that he refined were obviously stronger than the spiritual weapons on the market. Lin Sun didn't know the reason, but he could judge that the strange fluctuation of the gate to heaven was a mysterious and unknown power. When he really broke through all the levels in the heaven accessing place, he might be able to really understand and control this power. Time went by, and several days passed unconsciously. Lin Sun had already finalized all the ideas of refining the saber, determined the final plan, and processed all kinds of spiritual materials needed one by one. Now he just needed to start. In these days, Lin Sun's injuries were all healed, and his cultivation not only completely recovered, but also made a step forward than before. This was the direct benefit brought by the battle. The tempering of blood and fire was enough to make a practitioner transform again and again on the road of the strong. At the same time, Chirps also woke up 2 days ago. It seemed that nothing had changed, but Lin Sun knew that this little guy's talent was incredible. No one could be sure what it would become in the future. On this day, Lin Sun was ready to start refining spiritual ink, but he didn't expect that Chu Feng suddenly came to visit him. He looked solemn and worried. As soon as he saw Lin Sun, he said directly, "Brother, we have a big trouble this time." Lin Sun's eyes narrowed and he asked, "What's the matter?" Chu Feng said bitterly, "Last night, someone came to me directly and asked Master Sun to go with her." Lin Sun raised his eyebrows and asked, "Who is that person?" Chu Feng's expression became increasingly bitter. An old woman with inconceivably powerful strength. Most importantly, her background isn't simple at all. Although I don't know her background, I can tell from my observations that if I don't agree, she won't hesitate to kill me. Lin Sun was shocked. An old woman didn't take Chu Feng, the head of the commune of spiritual tattooists, seriously at all. It could be imagined how powerful she was. At this time, Shu Jin, who had been sleeping in the corner, suddenly opened his eyes and sneered silently. Then he shook his head and continued to sleep. Lin Sun didn't notice this scene. He frowned and asked, "Brother, do you agree?" Chu Feng shook his head quickly. "I dare not. But I only got 3 days to think about it. If I don't agree by then, I'm afraid." Lin Sun finally understood and couldn't help frowning and thinking. If he went with the old woman, he would undoubtedly expose his identity, which was absolutely not what Lin Sun wanted. The most important thing was that it would be too dangerous if the old woman had other ideas and wanted to harm him. Chu Feng seemed to see through Lin Sun's mind and said, "Don't worry. The old woman's purpose is very simple. She should just ask you to repair a spiritual weapon. She has no other intentions." Chapter 233. 3 days later, on the second floor of the commune of spiritual tattooists, led by Chu Feng, Lin Sun met the old woman with a powerful background. This was indeed an old woman. She had a head full of silver hair, an aged face, and turbid eyes. She looked like she had 1 foot in the grave, and she held a black wooden staff in her hand. She looked very ordinary, but when Lin Sun saw her for the first time, he felt as if he saw an erupting volcano with magma soaring into the sky and burning the world. It seemed that she was going to refine everything in the world. At that moment, Lin Sun couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart, which made his nerves tense. He felt an indescribable oppressive force and almost suffocated. His face suddenly changed, but when he looked at the old woman again, he didn't notice any difference, as if everything just now was an illusion. But the more it was like this, the more Lin Sun was afraid. Since he entered Xiao Empire, he had seen many powerful figures, such as Yao Tohai, a great practitioner who was famous in southwestern province, the mysterious Night Queen, the mysterious old man who followed the Night Queen, Xin Rudi, Shu Jin, Shu Sanchi, and so on. Like them, the momentum of the old woman in front of him also gave Lin a feeling of unfathomable and immeasurable. There was no doubt that this old woman was definitely one of the top masters in the world. Seeing Lin Sun, the old woman frowned and said, "Is this Master Sun?" Chu Feng's face changed, but Lin Sun answered first, "I'm the apprentice of Master Sun." The old woman's face suddenly became indifferent, and she said coldly, "Master Sun is too arrogant. Do I have to invite him in person?" "Senior, please calm down. Master Sun has always been eccentric and hates being coerced. But his apprentice can solve a lot of problems." Chu Feng hurriedly explained with a very humble attitude, "You may not know that this brilliant apprentice of Master Sun is deeply loved by Master Sun and has obtained the true inheritance of Master Sun. I believe he can satisfy you with his means." The old woman snorted coldly. "What if he can't solve it?" Before Chu Feng answered, Lin Sun said with a smile, "Whether it can be solved or not depends on what you want to repair. After all, even a grandmaster of spiritual tattoos wouldn't dare to say that he can definitely repair a thing." Seeing that Lin Sun, who seemed to be in his teens, showed a confident and calm demeanor, the old woman couldn't help but take another look at him. "What's your name?" the old woman asked. "Senior, my name is Lin Sun." Lin Sun cupped his hands and said. The old woman was startled. "Lin Sun, your name is somewhat offensive to your master's title." But Lin Sun said frankly, "My master once said that my name is predestined to be his, so he made an exception to accept me as his disciple. This is also a kind of fate." The old woman sneered. "I couldn't tell, but your master's personality is really strange. Even his disciple is so careless." This sentence was impolite. It not only ridiculed Master Sun, but also belittled Lin Sun. Chu Feng's heart skipped a beat. He looked at Lin Sun worriedly, lest he couldn't bear it and get angry. But to his surprise, Lin Sun suddenly smiled brightly at the moment. "Senior, you really have a sharp eye. I also feel that my master made this decision too carelessly, but I can't help it. My master is such a person." The old woman took a deep look at Lin Sun and said gloomily, "Boy, no matter what, if you can't solve my problem this time, don't blame me for being impolite." This sentence seemed to be extremely rude and unreasonable, which made Chu Feng tremble with fear again. However, Lin Sun just smiled and didn't make any comment, looking calm and relaxed. Let's go. The old woman turned around and left. Green Tea Pavilion. This was a courtyard located in the central area of Mist City, covering an area of 5 acres. The courtyard was bustling with small bridges, pavilions, and terraces. Exotic flowers and grasses could be seen everywhere. It was like a paradise in the downtown, extraordinarily quiet and elegant. This courtyard belonged to Keystone Business. Only the rich Keystone Business could own such a first-class courtyard in the central area where every inch of land was worth its weight in gold. At this time, in the hall of Green Tea Pavilion, Qi Yun Xiao, Yuan Shu, Wen Mingxiu, and other famous young men of aristocratic families in Mist City had already been seated in order. What was different from the past was that these young men of aristocratic families, who used to be arrogant and conceited in the past, were now very humble and even a little reserved, because they were just accompanying guests today. On the other side of the hall, there were still more than a dozen young men, all dressed in gorgeous clothes, looking arrogant and showing a unique and reserved sense of superiority in their speech and behavior. Compared with these young people, Qi Yun Xiao and the others were obviously inferior in terms of clothing and personal aura. The reason was very simple. These young men were all from the Forbidden City, the capital of the empire. Behind each of them stood a big force in the Forbidden City. If the aristocratic forces of the whole empire were divided into 3, 6, or 9 grades, the forces that could have a huge foundation in the Forbidden City were undoubtedly the first-class forces. This kind of force was often called aristocratic families. As for the top forces in Mist City, they could also be regarded as dominating in one area, but compared with the aristocratic families in the Forbidden City, they seem to be a little inadequate. Therefore, in the face of more than a dozen young men of aristocratic families from the Forbidden City, Qi Yun Xiao, Wen Mingxiu, and Yuan Shu could only act as accompanying guests and serve them carefully. What was embarrassing was that although they had lowered their posture, they could clearly perceive that the attitude of more than a dozen people had been very cold and even ignored them. For the first time in their lives, they tasted what it was like to be ignored. However, they dare not complain or get angry. Mingxiu, don't be sullen. These guys look down on us, but how can we look up to them? Look at them. All of them are arrogant and supercilious. If they were not born in the upper class, they would have been killed many times. Qi Yun Xiao saw that when Mingxiu was a little depressed, so he whispered to comfort her. I think you are very uncomfortable in your heart. When Mingxiu squinted at Qi Yun Xiao and also whispered to him, Qi Yun Xiao did not deny it and said, I am certainly uncomfortable in my heart, but there is nothing we can do about it. In terms of family background and identity, we are inferior to them after all. We have to admit this fact. When Mingxiu said, thoughtfully, the aristocratic families in the upper class also have a very strict hierarchy. Among the 13 young people here, 7 are from the lower class, 5 from the middle class, and 1 from the upper class. The aristocratic forces in Mist City can only be regarded as a local tyrant, even inferior to the lower class. According to my father, the reason why the aristocratic families are aristocratic families is not only because of their heritage and long history, but more importantly, their forces have penetrated into all aspects of the empire. Their every move can even affect the decisions of the upper class of the empire. This is the real horror of them. Speaking of this, when Mingxiu inadvertently glanced at a young man sitting on the opposite side, and then continued, Young Sword King Shai Yutong's family is one of the top 7 aristocratic families in the Forbidden City. It has a great influence in the imperial court and can be said to have great power. Speaking of this, when Mingxiu suddenly stiffened and her face changed slightly. She didn't know when Shai Yutong's eyes swept over her and fell on her, as if a silent warning. Just one glance made Wen Mingxiu's heart turn cold. Fortunately, Shai Yutong quickly withdrew his eyes, which made Wen Mingxiu feel like she had survived a disaster. Young Sword King Shai Yutong was a dazzling figure in the empire in recent years. It was rumored that he was a first-class cultivation genius. The sword scripture, he mastered was the secret of the CF family. But in the past 100 years, only Shai Yutong had comprehended and mastered it in the whole CF family. The most terrible thing was that Shai Yutong was only 19 years old this year, but he had already reached the sea spirit realm. His fighting capacity was so strong that he could be regarded as a first-class genius in the Forbidden City. I don't know why the young Sword King came here again. Among all the people here, only he has reached the sea spirit realm. It's too ostentatious, Qi Yinxiao said with some jealousy. Don't talk about him anymore. When Mingxiu was frightened by Shai Yutong's glance just now and dared not talk about him anymore. The atmosphere in the Hall of Green Tea Pavilion was very unique. Shai Yutong and other juniors from the aristocratic families of the empire were talking with each other happily. Although when Mingxiu, Qi Yinxiao, Yuan Shu, and the others were ignored, they could only sit there and accompany him carefully, not daring to neglect him. However, whether it was Shai Yutong or when Mingxiu, they could only be regarded as guests. They were all waiting for the host who lived here temporarily to show up. But as time went by, the host didn't show up. Even so, no one present was impatient. Even Shai Yutong and other juniors of the Forbidden City were very patient at this moment. Not long after, there was a sudden sound of footsteps outside the hall, which made all the people present feel refreshed and looked over. Many people even showed expectation. They maintained the best posture and etiquette and almost got up to go out to greet the guests. Before long, an old woman with silver hair appeared, followed by a teenager. There was no one else besides her. When they saw this scene, everyone couldn't help but be stunned. However, Shai Yutong and others obviously knew the identity of this old woman. To their surprise, the old woman was accompanied by a teenager they didn't know, but not the person they wanted to see. Who is this guy? Why could he appear with Granny Wind? When they saw the appearance of the teenager, Qi Yinxiao, when Mingxiu, Yuan Shu, and other juniors of the aristocratic families of Mist City couldn't help but widen their eyes. Chapter 234. Lin Sun. When they saw Lin Sun's appearance, when Mingxiu, Qi Yinxiao, Yuan Shu, and others were all surprised. They didn't expect that he would appear here today. Did he also come to visit the owner of this place? Immediately, their faces became uneasy as they thought of the bloody things that happened that night. Although that incident had long been suppressed, it was undoubtedly a great shame for them. When they met Lin Sun again at this moment, they couldn't calm down at all. However, they had all been warned by the elders of their clans that Lin Sun was not a poor man at all. On the contrary, he had a mysterious and powerful origin and was not someone they could provoke at all. Under such circumstances, even if they had all kinds of thoughts in their hearts, they could only hold back and not dare to act rashly. Especially Qi Yinxiao, who had experienced Lin Sun's means a few days ago. At this moment, when he saw Lin Sun appear in front of him again, he couldn't help but feel numb on the scalp. He cried bitterly in his heart and only hoped that this guy would not deliberately make trouble for him like that day. How could they dare to provoke Lin Sun now? They would be grateful if Lin Sun didn't make trouble for them. Seeing when Mingxiu and others, Lin Sun couldn't help but feel surprised. He wondered if the old woman brought him here to avenge when Mingxiu and the others. Fortunately, what happened next made Lin Sun breathe a sigh of relief, knowing that this was not a carefully prepared trap for him. The old woman said in surprise, "Do you know Lin Sun?" When Mingxiu and others looked at each other with some embarrassment. Of course, they knew Lin Sun, but the reason was so shameful that they would never say it out. But who would believe that they didn't know Lin Sun at this time? The people present were not fools. They could see some clues from their reactions when they saw Lin Sun just now. When Mingxiu and others hesitated, Lin Sun said with a smile, "We do know each other. There were some small conflicts before, but they have been solved now. It's not a big deal." The old woman was shrewd. She could see at a glance that what Lin Sun said might be true, but it couldn't be so simple. "Granny Wind, who is this?" On the other side of the hall, a young man from the Forbidden City couldn't help asking. He is a disciple of Master Sun from the commune of spiritual tattoos in Mist City. He was invited by me to repair a musical instrument for Mississippi, Granny Wind answered casually. Master Sun? The young men of the Forbidden City couldn't help being stunned, and then they showed a look of disapproval. For people like them, a mere spiritual tattooist of the commune of spiritual tattooists was nothing. Not to mention his disciple, who was even more insignificant. Hearing this introduction, when Mingxiu and others were all stunned. When did Lin Sun become the successor of Master Sun? Those young men from the aristocratic families in the Forbidden City might not know, but for those who grew up in Mist City, they were too clear about Master Sun's reputation in Mist City. Now, Lin Sun became the successor of Master Sun, which really surprised them and even puzzled them. This guy was too mysterious, wasn't he? Lin Sun remained calm, as if he didn't notice all this. But when he glanced across the hall and saw the figure sitting in the seat of honor, he couldn't help but be shocked. Shai Yutong. How could it be him? The man was dressed in a green robe, with his hair in a bun and sleeves fluttering in the wind. He carried a blue long sword with pine patterns on his back. Sitting there casually, he had a kind of aloof demeanor, as if he was an immortal who descended to the world. Lin Sun would never forget this person. When Lin Sun and Xie Ji were chased by a barbarian in the 3,000 mountains, they were saved by Shai Yutong, who passed by at the critical moment. Whoosh! Almost at the same time, Shai Yutong also looked at Lin Sun from a distance. His eyes were like a pair of sharp swords, which made Lin Sun stiffen and wake up from his messy thoughts. I seem to have seen you before. Shai Yutong frowned suddenly, which surprised everyone in the hall. Who was Shai Yutong? He was the one with the highest status in the hall. How could they not be surprised when he suddenly said that he seemed to have seen Lin Sun before? Even Granny Wind couldn't help but be surprised. She thought that Lin Sun was just a successor of Master Sun and was of little importance. Who would have thought that as soon as he entered the hall, he would be recognized by a group of young men from the aristocratic families in Mist City, and it seemed that they were all a little afraid of Lin Sun. This surprised Granny Wind, but she didn't expect that even Shai Yutong seemed to recognize this boy, which was a bit unusual. Lin Sun took a deep breath and said, "Yes, Child Shai is my savior. About a year ago, in the 3,000 mountains in the southwest border, Child Shai saved me from a barbarian. I wonder if Child Shai still remembers it?" Shai Yutong thought for a moment and then said, "It's you." Immediately, he withdrew his gaze and looked indifferent. Seeing this, all the aristocratic children in the Forbidden City laughed. At a glance, they could see that Shai Yutong had nothing to do with Lin Sun at all. He even forgot that he had saved Lin Sun, which undoubtedly showed that Shai Yutong didn't take him seriously at all. In other words, Lin Sun was certainly not a powerful figure. Thinking of this, the aristocratic children in the Forbidden City became more relaxed, and even looked at Lin Sun with a sense of superiority. As for Wen Mingxiu, Qi Yanxiao, Yuan Shu, and others, they couldn't help but blame themselves for thinking too much just now. In this regard, Lin Sun didn't feel anything. Anyway, Shai Yutong did save him once, and he must acknowledge this favor. As for being looked down upon by Shai Yutong or being despised by many people present, he didn't care. Granny Wind watched all this coldly and said, "Little guy, wait here for a moment. I'll ask Miss Lin to come out." She turned her head and looked at Shai Yutong. "Yutong, come with me." Saying this, she turned around and walked out of the hall with Shai Yutong. "Senior." At this time, Lin Sun suddenly spoke. "What's the matter?" Granny Wind asked without looking back. Everyone looked at Lin Sun in unison, wondering what he was going to do. Unexpectedly, Lin Sun asked a question that was completely unexpected. "Well, I just want to ask, is there a seat for me in this hall?" Granny Wind couldn't help but be stunned. She snorted and said, "The hall is so big, you can sit anywhere you like." After saying this, she disappeared from the hall with Shai Yutong. Seeing this, Lin Sun couldn't help smiling and glanced around the hall. Others thought his question was strange, but only he knew that it was not strange at all, and even very important. The reason was very simple. At this time, in the hall, the seats on the left were occupied by Wen Mingxiu and others, and the seats on the right were occupied by a group of aristocratic children in the Forbidden City. Although Shai Yutong's seat was empty, it obviously didn't belong to him. Therefore, In addition to the main seat at the top, there was no other empty seat. Lin Sun didn't want to sit with these two groups of people, but he couldn't stand here and wait foolishly, which would make his situation too embarrassing. Therefore, he had to fight for a seat for himself. After all, he was invited here to help. If he was left here so casually without a seat, Lin Sun had to wonder whether Granny Wind asked him for help or deliberately humiliated him. Fortunately, Granny Wind's answer made Lin Sun at least able to judge that this old woman didn't deliberately embarrass him. Having figured this out, Lin Sun calmly found a futon on the side of the hall and sat down on the ground. He took out a pot of wine and drank by himself on the ground, looking leisurely and contented. Everyone couldn't help but look a little strange. This guy was so friendly and impolite. Did he really think of this place as his home? Look at his lazy appearance. He didn't care about manners at all. If he was seen by the owner of this place, how could he behave like this? The more aristocratic the children were, the more they paid attention to etiquette and demeanor. Therefore, seeing Lin Sun's appearance at this moment, many people couldn't help but show contempt and disdain. When Mingxiu and others didn't dare to provoke Lin Sun, but for those aristocratic children from the Forbidden City, Lin Sun's attitude was a little unbearable. Someone couldn't help but frown and ask, "Qi Yunxiao, we have just arrived in Mist City and don't know the situation here. Why don't you introduce to us who Master Sun is?" Qi Yunxiao was stunned and looked at Lin Sun. He could only brace himself to explain the deeds of Master Sun. The teenager who asked the question was Huang Jinxiong, born in the Huang clan of the inferior aristocratic family in the Forbidden City. At the age of 16, he was very proud and arrogant. After listening to Qi Yunxiao's explanation, Huang Jinxiong couldn't help but sneer, since Master Sun is so great, but his disciple is so rude. I have to wonder whether Master Sun's character is also so bad. This sentence was so rude that it was even worse than scolding the locust tree. After all, who would directly question and attack the master in front of the disciple? Qi Yunxiao's heart thumped. He didn't know what to say. If he offended Lin Sun, the consequences would be very serious. At this moment, everyone in the hall noticed that the atmosphere had changed. Those disciples from the Forbidden City looked at Lin Sun with a touch of playfulness in their eyes. When Mingxiu, Qi Yunxiao, and others were frightened. They didn't want to get involved in this storm because no matter who they offended, it would bring them very serious consequences. At this time, Lin Sun drank up a glass of wine and looked at Huang Jinxiao. He smiled and shook his head, saying, "Is this the etiquette your parents taught you? If so, I have to wonder if your parents are like you." Bang! Chapter 235. Although Lin Sun didn't know the identity of Huang Jinxiong and others, he could tell from the cautious and uneasy posture of Wen Mingxiu and others that these guys must be powerful. What was more, not everyone was qualified to sit with young Sword King Shai Yutong. But Lin Sun didn't care about this. Otherwise, he wouldn't have chosen a fight with more than a dozen powerful forces in Mist City. Strictly speaking, in Lin Sun's eyes, there was no difference between power and status, only between enemies and friends. Therefore, in the face of Huang Jinxiong's unceremonious ridicule, Lin Sun also chose to fight back. But it was obvious that Huang Jinxiong had a bad temper. Lin Sun's words had completely irritated him, and he pounded the table and stood up, looking at Huang Jinxiong, who suddenly flew into a rage. When Mingxiu, Qi Yunxiao, Yuan Shu, and others all trembled in their hearts, and their faces changed slightly. The young men around Huang Jinxiong sneered and looked at Lin Sun as if he was a dead man. They all knew very well that Huang Jinxiong had an extremely violent temper. Otherwise, he would not be the first to mock Lin Sun just now. But even they didn't expect that Lin Sun would have such a tough temper. He even dared to fight back directly and humiliate Huang Jinxiong with words, which was no different from courting death. When did a successor of a spiritual tattooist in Mist City dare to challenge them? But Lin Sun was still smiling. Looking at Huang Jinxiong, who looked gloomy, Lin Sun said, "You get angry at the slightest disagreement. Your temper is as stinky as your mouth." As he said, he deliberately covered his nose with his hand, showing a disgusted look. The blue veins on Huang Jianxiong's forehead stood out, and his heart was full of anger. He shouted, "Bastard, I must kill you today." When he was about to make a move, he was stopped by a golden-robed teenager next to him, who said, "It's just a deal with a rude and ignorant guy. Why do you condescend to do it yourself? You think too highly of him." Huang Jinxiong was stunned. The golden-robed teenager had raised his head, glanced at the opposite side, and said, "Everyone, Mist City is your territory. Now there are evil guests who come to challenge our dignity. Are you going to sit back and do nothing?" When Mingxiu and others' faces suddenly changed, and they secretly complained in their hearts. They didn't want to get involved in this storm, but now they were directly called out by the opponent. What to do? They looked at each other with hesitation. This caused the eyes of the golden-robed young man and the others to turn cold, and their expressions became hostile. Qi Yunxiao braced himself and said with difficulty, "My friends, it's not that we don't want to, but we are not Lin Sun's opponents." It was more painful for him to admit that he was not as good as Lin Sun under the watchful eyes of the public. But he had no choice. He had to do so under the circumstances. When Mingxiu and the others also nodded with a helpless look. This startled Huang Jinxiong and others. They realized that something was wrong with the situation. It was very unusual that Lin Sun could suppress the sons of the aristocratic families in Mist City and make them not dare to show their faces. Good. Very good. It seems like this is how you treat your guests. Fine, if you don't care, then don't blame us for being impolite. Huang Jinxiong was so angry that he laughed. There was a strong threat in his voice, which made the faces of Qi Yunxiao and the others change again. They felt uncomfortable, as if they were sitting on pins and needles. "Child Huang." Qi Yunxiao opened his mouth to explain, but was interrupted by Huang Jinxiong. "Don't say anything. It's a shame for me to sit with you." Then he looked at Lin Sun coldly and said, "Kneel down and apologize now, and I can leave you a whole body." His words were arrogant and full of killing intent. At this moment, Huang Jinxiong was surrounded by blazing green light. His eyes were like blades, and his whole body released a violent and terrible aura. The atmosphere in the hall suddenly became tense. "So, whether I apologize or not, you're going to kill me this time?" Lin Sun looked surprised. "Nonsense. This is the lightest punishment. In the past, you wouldn't die so easily even if you wanted to," Huang Jinxiong said coldly. "But have you forgotten that I was invited by Granny Wind? If you kill me, do you think Granny Wind will agree?" Lin Sun didn't seem to be angry at all and said with a smile. Many people frowned. They thought that the reason why Lin Sun dared to be so fearless was that he wanted Granny Wind to support him. Huang Jinxiong was stunned and sneered. "I didn't expect that you were more shameless than I thought. Do you really think Granny Wind can save you?" Lin Sun thought for a moment and said, "It depends on whether you dare to do it or not." Huang Jinxiong's face darkened again, and he couldn't hold back anymore. He rushed out and grabbed Lin Sun fiercely with his palms and fingers like dragon claws. Boom! Under this grasp, a terrible green gang chi was produced, which was fierce and terrible, crushing the air and making a loud sound. Dragon Claw. It was one of the secret skills of Huang clan. Once used, it was like a hidden dragon stretching out its giant claw from the clouds, which was unexpected and powerful. Many young men of the Forbidden City were surprised. They didn't expect that Huang Jinxiong would use such a killing move as soon as he attacked. Obviously, he intended to kill Lin Sun with one blow. On the other side, when Mingxiu and the others gasped, the power of this grab made them feel creepy and chilled. It could also be seen that Huang Jinxiong, a descendant of an aristocratic family, seemed to be extremely arrogant, but in fact his combat effectiveness was undoubtedly strong. Lin Sun judged that Huang Jinxiong was also in human gang realm at the moment of his attack, but he was obviously more powerful than the practitioners in the same realm. In particular, the fighting method he used was a powerful, unique skill. Once it was used, the atmosphere was solemn and the pressure was full of extraordinary. But for Lin Sun, it might be a threat, but it was far from fatal. Lin Sun also moved at the same time. The terrifying gang chi around him ran like a tide, and he punched out. It was simple, direct, and neat, but it had an unstoppable and condensed force. Seeing this punch, it was like seeing a condensed and compressed storm suddenly breaking out in an instant, trying to tear the world and wreak havoc. Boom! The palm collided with the fist, and the huge aftermath exploded. The strong wind caused a wave of air, sweeping through the hall, smashing the tables and chairs, and filling the air with smoke and dust. Many people dodged and retreated in advance, not being affected. But when they saw the situation in the field, they couldn't help but change their faces slightly. Lin Sun stood still in the same place. Huang Jinxiong stepped back a few steps. His face turned blue and white, and his breath became disordered. At the moment of confrontation, he felt like being hit by a mountain, and he almost couldn't resist it. "Come again!" Huang Jinxiong roared, his long hair flying in the air, and his hands grasped in the air again and again. A series of illusory claw prints with dazzling cyan light shrouded Lin Sun overwhelmingly. The hall was full of the shrill sound of the air being torn apart, which made people's faces change. Lin Sun didn't retreat, but moved forward. His figure was swift, and every time he punched, a cyan claw print was smashed. Almost in a flash, he rushed to Huang Jinxiong. Boom! In an instant, Huang Jinxiong didn't even have the time to dodge, and he was blasted flying by the punch. His body smashed fiercely onto the wall over 30 m away, and the bones in his entire body almost broke. It caused his expression to warp and turn livid. All the young men of the Forbidden City were shocked and couldn't believe their eyes. Although Huang Jinxiong's fighting capacity was not the most powerful among them, he could be regarded as a first-class one among his peers. He could easily deal with dozens of ordinary human gangrel practitioners. Originally, they thought that it was easy for Huang Jinxiong to deal with a successor of a spiritual tattooist and kill him in one fell swoop. Who would have thought that Huang Jinxiong not only didn't get the slightest advantage, but was also knocked out in one fell swoop? This was too shocking. Was Lin Sun a top master in the human gang realm? Although, when Ming Xiu, Qi Yunxiao, and others had long known that Lin Sun's fighting capacity was extremely fierce, when they saw him suppress Huang Jinxiong with only 2 punches, they still couldn't help feeling upset. "Bastard! I'm going to kill you!" With a roar, Huang Jinxiong rushed again like a madman. A sneer appeared on Lin Sun's lips. This guy really didn't give up. But the next moment, Lin Sun's pupil shrank as he saw Huang Jinxiong suddenly take out a blood-red crossbow shaped like an eagle's beak. Bloody spirit-piercing crossbow. Lin Sun's heart suddenly jumped. Bloody spirit-piercing crossbow. The others present couldn't help changing their expressions. They didn't expect that Huang Jinxiong would use such a vicious and terrible weapon in his rage. "Go to hell." Huang Jinxiong grinned and pulled the trigger. Under the watchful eyes of the public, he was defeated by Lin Sun with 2 punches. The strong sense of shame made Huang Jinxiong desperate. A strand of a strange sound resounded, and then a myriad of needles that were fine like the hair on an oxen suffused with a hazy, bloody glow suddenly shot out explosively. This blow was too fast and too sudden, covering all the areas around Lin Sun. There was no way to dodge. In an instant, Lin Sun only felt a tingling pain all over his body. Blood needles as thin as cow's hair passed through his body and rushed to his sea of consciousness. This was the horror of the bloody spirit-piercing crossbow. What shot was not a real arrow, but a piercing needle made by a unique secret method. This needle seemed inconspicuous and couldn't do any harm to the body of a practitioner, but it could pierce the sea of consciousness of a practitioner in an instant and obliterate his soul. This kind of sinister killing weapon was practically unavoidable during a surprise attack. It was incomparably terrifying. Puff, 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 wisps of tiny piercing needles constantly rushed to the sea of consciousness, making Lin Sun's soul tremble and produce an unspeakable pain. At this critical moment of danger, Lin Sun took a deep breath and ran the star circulation method of meditating magic. The 21 spiritual stars hanging in the sea of consciousness suddenly shone brightly like a burning sun, sprinkling silver brilliance. Lin Sun's last-minute action had an incredible effect. The piercing needles that rushed in were immediately wrapped by the silver light. In an instant, they were completely melted with a sizzling sound as if they were burning.